Hello everyone, and welcome to the 411 Ground and Pound radio show, your mostly weekly look into the wide, wacky, wonderful world of mixed martial arts. I'm your host, Robert Winfrey, and today we will be, well, whenever you happen to be listening to this, the purpose of this show, I should make these less chronologically specific, we will be reviewing UFC 225, which came your way, we're recording this on Sunday evening, so it came your way Saturday evening. Horribly bipolar show. Some truly great stuff, including the fight of the year so far, by a significant margin. And some pretty awful stuff. There were some just horrible fights, but we'll get into all of the specifics there. We'll talk about some of the drama that surrounded the main event, because... ugh. Again, some serious bipolarness going on as it pertains to this card, and that's not just the fights and the quality of fights, it's everything, so we'll get into that. And then, of course, any major news items that we feel like bringing up and giving our takes on, and then we'll be out of here. So, first up, let me introduce my regular partner in crime, 411 Mania's Jack of all trades. As we are recording, he's on his way back from E3 coverage, so if there's a little bit of extra noise on his end, I apologize, but timing is a thing, guys. So, Jeff Harris is with us. Jeff, how does this evening find you?
Yo, everyone. I did not miss early weigh-ins today, because I didn't go to any.
And here with us again from the East Coast, the pugilistic pontiff, Pat Mullen is here. Pat, I'm still basking in the afterglow of this main event. How are you?
We're talking good, bad, and the ugly, and I don't mean Clint Eastwood and Eli Wallach.
That's a great movie. All right, before we get into the actual fight, the main event from UFC 225, which was the rematch between Robert Whittaker and Yoel Romero, it needs to be brought up, and I do want to talk about this very briefly. Again, there's a lot of actual action that deserves more attention than some of the bureaucratic BS and the other issues that went on around the main event here. But Yoel Romero missed weight. He officially weighed in at 185.2 pounds. Now, there's a bit of... I'm pissed at everybody about this. Let me be very clear about this. I'm deeply annoyed at Yoel Romero for not getting... he only hired a nutritionist, I believe, on Tuesday, so he got to sign in for fight week and then hired someone to actually help him with his weight cut, which is just stupid. A weight cut is a 2 or 3 month long process if you're doing it right. I mean, Ben Askren, I think, has the best take on weight cutting in MMA and how to do it properly. I think he went over it on the Joe Rogan Experience. So if you want a guy who, I don't agree with Askren on everything. He's kind of a weird guy. But if you want someone who pretty clearly has his head screwed on straight about weight cutting in MMA and how to approach it and how to deal with it, give that a listen, because I think he's generally speaking in the right. So Yoel misses on his first attempt, and then I believe he was told he was going to have 2 hours to make another cut, which is... And this is another thing that is horribly inconsistent because each state is different. There are some states that do not give you extra time, period. There are some states that will provisionally give you extra time if the UFC greases the wheels enough. there are some that just have a standing thing of, hey, if you miss weight the first time on your first attempt within this window, you get an extra opportunity to cut. I mean, again, it just varies wildly from state to state. And then the commission apparently, and again, some of this, this is what I was told. This was Romero's perspective. This was the official position of the UFC on this, which is not to say it is concrete, but this is where I'm getting my information from as it pertains to the sequence of events. Happy to be corrected if I'm wrong. The commission steps in and stops him from cutting weight. So he's only given, I think he only got an hour out of the time he believed he had to finish making that cut. Officially weighs in 1/5 of a pound over, and this also bothers me because I have a somewhat potentially controversial position on how, like, rounding should work in weigh-ins. I think if you get to 0.5 over the limit for whatever your fight is, so in the case of a middleweight title fight, it's 185.5, you have missed. If you're below half a pound, I think you should round it down. But that's just me, and the reason I say that is because if you're dealing with that, I mean, 1/5 of a pound is nothing. It's nothing. It has no impact on the outcome of a fight. Like, I mean, Tai Tuivasa outweighed Andrei Arlovski on the same card by like 12 to 14 pounds. Tyson Fury had I say boxing in the loosest sense of the term, match earlier this week, and outweighed the guy by, how much was that, Pat? I mean, it was well over double digits.
Yeah, it was over 15 pounds, if I'm not mistaken. And aside from a foot taller now.
Yeah, and
championship weight is championship weight.
And
the
again,
the weight Yoel Romero was 185.00, not 0.2, not 0.1. Even if it was 0.001, it does not matter.
Oh, it was. Come on, Whittaker weighed in at 185.001. If you get that far down, you're You're being unbelievably pedantic about weighing in.
Yeah.
As Mike Dolce says, it doesn't matter if it's 0.2 pounds or a million miles. He missed weight. He signed on his contract, 185.0. I am not being shallow and pedantic. These are the rules.
If you say 0.002, like a freaking clothespin weighs 0.002 of a pound.
Then he should have lost. Then he should have been able to lose it. Then he should have been able to lose it at 9 a.m. on the dot. That's simple.
No, again, I am not excusing.
He had plenty of time. He had plenty of time to prepare for this.
Yes,
he has no excuses. No excuses.
I am not excusing Yoel Romero at all.
You are excusing by entertaining this. You are excusing.
No, I said I was mad at everybody. I'm mad at Romero for not making the weight the way he should.
So is Mike Dolce.
And I'm equally pissed at
the UFC. The UFC is at fault for trusting a guy who missed weight in the UFC title main event before. They rewarded him. You can't reward fighters for doing that, and they do it frequently.
Yeah. No, again, when I say I'm mad at everybody, it's equal. Like, I am not. The fact that I am also pissed at the Athletic Commission for being for some of the policies in this, for some of the policies and the way they conducted themselves as it pertains to this, does not at all negate my utter, the fact that I hate that Yoel Romero. I mean, I was okay with the totality of circumstance around his fight with Luke Rockhold. He took it on short notice when he was already in the midst of a cut for a fight a week later, and it screwed up all the timing, and I was okay with that. I mean, this was a guy who had never missed weight prior to that in either his MMA or his amateur wrestling career, and just when you looked at the totality of circumstance for that one, I understand. I don't like it, but I understand it. No, not here. You knew that the date was set well in advance. The weight was agreed upon months in advance. That is on him. The fact that this was exacerbated by the behavior and policy of the commission, who also has this really weird rule that I genuinely wonder if they enforced for the co-main event. This is actually on the books for the Illinois Athletic Commission. If you're fighting in a title fight, you cannot weigh on fight night more than 10 pounds above the championship weight limit. And I seriously wonder if they made sure that Colby Covington and Rafael dos Anjos did not weigh more than 180 pounds on fight night.
Why,
I mean,
why wonder? You know damn well they didn't.
I assume they didn't, but I don't have proof.
Well, some states do have that same-day weigh-in rule. Doesn't another state have a rule that you can't be over a certain limit the day of the fight?
It's not necessarily states so much as bodies sanctioning the fights, and certain states choose to implement that.
Oh, God, there's one state. I want to say Tennessee. Don't hold me to this. I want to say it's Tennessee that for a while, and they may have amended this, but the first time the UFC went there, Diego Sanchez was in like the main or the co-main. I can't remember which one of those two. But they actually mandated that you weigh in the same day as the fight. So the UFC just held their weigh-ins at midnight.
Yep.
To me, Yoel Romero, for him to start his weight cut on Tuesday and hire nutritionists on Tuesday, I can't put this on anyone else other than him.
No, and my other gripe about the Illinois Athletic Commission is if you're in Vegas, if you're like, I believe the Vegas Athletic Commission would just round that down. I know Montreal does. I disagree with Montreal's policy because if you're like 0.9, they'll still round down, which I think is stupid.
Toronto did it for Mark Hominick.
Yeah.
Yep.
And it was more than 0.2. It was a quarter of a pound.
Yeah, they dropped him 0.25 as opposed to, and again, like, that's an entirely separate frustration that I have from the frustration of Yoel Romero not timing this properly, not doing it properly, absent mitigating circumstances. Because again, when he fought Luke Rockhold, there were circumstances that I can accept that these circumstances led to this outcome. That makes sense to me. Not so much here. There's no other, there was no, that I'm aware of, there was no injury that potentially hampered it. There was no timing shift. There was no illness.
Is not part of the problem also here that they're so lax on non-title fights where you get to weigh in a full pound or so over the limit?
That bothers me too, but yeah, for those of you who don't know, and I don't know the full history behind this, when you see a non-title fight in a weight class, let's take welterweight, just for the sake of example. Per the official guidelines, as currently established, the welterweight division exists anywhere from 156 to 170 pounds. If you weigh in officially anywhere in that range, you're a welterweight. For non-title fights, for some reason, they don't care if you weigh 171 instead of 170. And this is true
That's the rule for every weight class.
Yes. Again, I just use that as an example. That is again literally the case for every weight class.
All right, so are you saying do away with the 1 pound allowance on non-title fights?
Yes, 100 times yes.
I wouldn't be opposed to them doing that. And part of that is you get a lot of people who are just really, really used to.
All right, since we're on this discussion, here's what needs to happen. We have to. We need one set of rules. We can't keep operating under this assumptions of all these multiple rule sets and everything. We need one accepted, ratified set of rules.
Yeah, this is the same problem we've had in boxing for decades.
Here's what needs to happen. All of the commissions and regulatory bodies need to come together and agree upon one official set of rules for combat sports and MMA that will be accepted among this collective. Like a UN, basically what I'm talking about is a UN of combat sport athletic commissions I know maybe it doesn't sound feasible, but I feel like we can't. All right. Well, if it's not feasible, what's not feasible right now is the fact that we go into a different state and different country, and it's always a different set of rules.
And it will never change.
You know what? Pat, that's a defeatist attitude, and I don't agree with it.
It's one borne out by history. I mean, this
Yeah,
is...
It's based around fact. I mean,
there was
Dana White said we couldn't have out-of-competition drug testing and year-round drug testing. So,
don't ever go by what Dana White says. We've proven that, too.
And then he piggybacked on an existing organization.
All right, so why can't, if we can bring in USADA to the sport, we need to bring in a unified set of rules on weight cutting, on weigh-ins, and the judging and rule sets.
And it'll never happen.
I mean, I agree with both of you. That is something that really
never's a long time, Pat.
Yes, it is.
I'll bet on it.
And I mean, there was that. I mean, Pat, you would know more about the history of this particular rule transition than I would. But when the Marquis of Queensberry backed the change in rules for boxing, I mean, there was a huge amount of both pushback and then regulatory, such as it was at the time, issues surrounding changing from the London prize ring style of rules to what's referred to as the Marquis of Queensberry rules. Even though he didn't actually come up with them, he just sponsored them. And if memory serves, like even the London prize ring was a significant departure from the rule set and scoring criteria that came before it. Though, I mean, again, you know more about that than I do, so please feel free to correct me.
I mean, it was all the difference in that scenario versus this scenario is that scenario was one where it was made to accept legality so that these fights could happen, so that money could be made off of them, whereas right now, money is to be made off of them. And because of these varying sets of rules from state to state and country to country, it allows these countries more say in what goes on. It allows them more of an opportunity to create scenarios for them to make money off of them. And that's also what's going to be the dictating factor. It's why, despite these congressional hearings for years, you've never seen one universal regulatory boxing commission. Right? It's the same scenario that MMA is dealing with and will deal with for the entirety of its existence.
It would take
I don't like it.
I don't like it either. I don't think anybody likes it.
No, nobody likes it, but it's unfortunately the way it is.
And look, if we can find a legitimate methodology to actually influence and bring about this, the change that is required here, I'm all for it. But
why is Yoel Romero, who's been doing this a long time, he's an Olympic silver medalist, he's been in combat sports for probably most of his life, okay?
Yep.
And this is the fight. This is the biggest fight of his career. I mean, very few athletes at his age are able to get an opportunity like this. Very few athletes
half his age get that opportunity.
Exactly. Very few athletes in the UFC are even able to get this opportunity. Why is he waiting until Tuesday to start a weight cut when he's already, he doesn't carry around much body fat in the first place.
It wasn't that he started his weight cut on Tuesday. It was that was when he actually brought in a nutritionist to help him with it. I mean, he'd been cutting for a while. That's the nature of weight cuts when you're at that level. But no, I mean, like,
why didn't he bring? Why not have a nutritionist early?
No earthly idea.
Stupid belief in himself. Literally,
I would accept
that's what it is. Blind, stupid belief in himself, thinking that I missed it by this much that last time. It's fine. I'm going to make it this time. I'm not worried about it. And I'll just do this, and it'll be fine. And since I was close last time, but I didn't make it, I know what I'll do. I'll fix this and this and this myself. And then what'll happen is I'll bring in somebody just the last few days just to make sure I'm on the right path, and we'll be fine. Everything's great. I fight for the title. I win. It'll be great. And what happened? None of that. He screwed up, which we've established, has only himself to blame for said screw-up, and this is why he's not the champion, among other things. But if you want a principal factor as to why he's not champion, it's because he put himself in position not to fight for the belt.
Is it blind, stupid belief in himself or blind, stupid belief that God is on his side because he's a soldier of God?
There's no such thing as blind, stupid belief that God's on your side because God is always on your side.
Right. Well,
anyway,
I guess it wasn't on Yoel Romero's side when he was cutting weight, though.
He came within an eyelash of knocking Robert Whittaker out cold. I mean,
but he didn't.
He didn't, and there's a reason for that because God's not going to justify somebody who didn't do something the right way.
And God helps those who help themselves, and take all necessary steps that you can possibly take, and God makes up the difference. If Romero, if you want to get religious on this and the religious philosophy behind it, if Romero had, not taking all the proper steps that you can take, you can't expect God to make up every bit of difference.
All right. Well, you know what? All the fighters who like the early morning weigh-ins, you can blame Darren Till and Yoel Romero.
And others. Yourselves for being too stupid to actually organize.
Correct.
I mean, look, if there's enough of them that like that, you need a body or some kind of representation to put forth your interests on that level.
But you idiots are all too selfish and don't understand that, and you'll never do it.
Look, sign your Project Spearhead cards, guys. That's all I can say about that. All right, moving on from that, again, the weight issues, to the actual fight, because I hated the drama around it. I hated that Romero missed weight. I hated the way the Athletic Commission handled it. Everything surrounding the bell-to-bell action in this fight, I tend to hate. Thankfully, once that bell rang, that all went away, and we got glorious, glorious combat action. This fight, again, it's my fight of the year to date by a significant margin. I am really struggling to come up with even a close second. This was such a great fight. This was a complete reversal in many respects of their first fight. They come out, they touch gloves because for some reason, despite the damage these two have done to each other and the years they've taken off of their lives, they actually get along. They touch gloves, they reset, and the first thing Robert Whittaker does is the first thing that Yoel Romero did to him in the first fight. He throws a really nasty lead leg side kick to the knee of Romero and proceeds to incorporate this into his offense. Whittaker wins the first 2 rounds, much like Romero won the first 2 in their first fight. And then, including swelling up Romero's right eye pretty badly with a jab. I mean, Robert Whittaker has maybe the best jab in all of MMA. Due respect to George, Bisping's retired. Who's the other guy with a really nice jab?
DJ Penn.
He's retired too. I mean, actively. I don't
Justin
know.
Ledet.
Ledette's got a pretty good jab. There's a bantamweight who does. I can't remember. Anyway, point being, I'm of the opinion that Bobby Knuckles has the best jab in MMA. It's a really beautiful weapon that he uses, and he did hit Yoel Romero on the right eye just right, and it started swelling. I mean, if that cornerman hadn't gotten that under control, that could have easily been fight-stopping swelling. That was pretty nasty. And that was in the second. And then in the third, on the smallest of things, I've rewatched this sequence because I can, and it's beautiful. Robert Whittaker, who's been winning this fight pretty handily to this point, throws a front kick to the body, which he's been doing all fight. A very active kicking game. It lands into the body kind of around the hip. And this time, Romero does something really, really small, but it's what actually leaves the opening for the punch that lands to follow it up. He kind of steps into it and a little bit off to his left at an angle. This does 2 things to the kick of Whittaker, because it lands, but he can't bring it straight back to reset his feet where they were, and the momentum of Romero's body actually off-balances that leg just a little. So when he comes back to get back on both feet, they're a little bit closer together, and Romero is just a little bit further to Romero's own left than he was before, and the right-hand counter that Romero had launched subsequently crashes into Robert Whittaker's chin and drops him like a rock. It's this really small adjustment that Romero made, and because if he's where he started out when he threw that punch, Whittaker's actually behind his own shoulder. He's kind of shoulder rolled off of it. But, again, small adjustment, and Whittaker goes down. Romero jumps on him. Flurries. Whittaker gets back up. They start trading these horrific elbows in the clinch. I mean, that whole round is just market insanity. It's so great. This isn't just fight of the year. That's the round of the year. Whittaker somehow survives because, I mean, I have no earthly idea what his chin and his heart are made of, because that same sequence has absolutely slept plenty of other elite-level world-class fighters. The fourth round actually becomes the swing round in terms of scoring. Whittaker, again, he recovers somehow, miraculously, from being hit by that truck, and starts coming out and goes back to work. He kind of gets his jab going again. He gets his front kicks going. Romero's still tagging him. Romero somehow had a much better feel for his counter game dialed in this time. His defense was much better, especially relative to their first fight. And right towards the end of that round, another booming right from Romero pretty badly wobbles Whittaker. Not enough time to really make something out of it. They get close and kind of trade again. And again, this becomes the swing round of the fight, because I thought that final bit of work from Romero was enough to overcome the statistical deficit he was operating at relative to efficacy, which is the all-important qualifier for scoring. Then in the fifth round, and this is a point I need to actually apologize to everyone who was following and has read my report over. The fifth round, I think about halfway through it, Romero lands another right that drops Whittaker, and he spends the rest of the round in various positions on top of Whittaker, kind of pounding at him. And there's a few things about Whittaker's defense there that I really have to praise, but let me get through the description here. Gets through, and he pounds on him until kind of we get to the end of until time runs out. That round, if I was being as consistent as I should be when leaning, because there were a couple of other rounds throughout this particular card that were marginal 10-8s that I called 10-8, and more importantly that I actually mentioned in my brief little thing on my scorecard about, it could have been a 10-8 round or it was a marginal 10-8. I try to do that so that there's a more accurate feel about what had transpired in a round. If I think it's a close round, I'll say it's a close round. Or, who knows. I believe I've used that as a descriptor. Even if I decided that this wasn't a 10-8 round, and if I rewatch that entire fight, there's a real chance I'll look at that round and go, yeah, that's a 10-8, especially under the new scoring criteria, which is what we were operating under for this fight. At a minimum, I should have mentioned that there's a solid argument for a 10-8 in favor of Romero in that round. I mean, at a minimum, I should have acknowledged that. So, oversight on my part. My apologies about that, guys. We get to the official decision. Robert Whittaker wins a split decision. There was 2 48-47s for him, 1 48-47 for Romero. There's so much to unpack from this. Let me start with Whittaker's defense once he got hurt, especially in the fifth round. He did a really good job of holding a single leg, because he's not going to take down Yoel Romero, especially from his knees, but holding it and burying his head between the thighs of Romero so that he could not be hit in the head anymore. And to do that while wobbled and exhausted after, 20-plus minutes of fighting and being rocked more than once, there's a lot of instinctual savvy to Robert Whittaker's game that really does need to be acknowledged. Both of these guys are just fundamentally incredible fighters. Again, I'm pissed at Romero for missing weight. Absent that, again, just taking his actual fighting, I love watching that guy fight. He fought this whole fight orthodox. I don't think he has spent anything approaching appreciable time or delivered anything that could even be remotely constrained as effective offense from an orthodox stance for the totality of his UFC career to this point. He fought the totality of the Rockhold fight southpaw. He fought all of the first Whittaker fight southpaw. I have never seen him fight out of the orthodox stance. Again, he might switch there very briefly now and then, but I have never seen him actually fight out of it. And he spent this entire fight fighting orthodox, basically. And to do that at 41. I mean, I couldn't do that when I was 21. It's utterly amazing. And to Robert Whittaker, who clearly won 2 rounds, and the first 2 are clearly his, arguably won the 4th, and if that's your position, I'm not going to argue too much with you over it. It's I'd need to rewatch that round specifically, but if I feel that I have to rewatch a round to really get a firm stance on it, I'm just not going to argue with you over whether you went 10-8 one way or the other. It's a waste of everyone's time and energy. And to do all that again after being rocked, and he broke his right hand in the first round. Something about fighting Yoel Romero just, again, the first time his left MCL gets blown out in the opening round. This time he breaks his right hand in the first round. So he beat Yoel Romero, this monster of a man, the first time clearly on one leg, and this time officially, even if you want to debate some of the scoring, he did technically win with one hand. Robert Whittaker is a monster. This is a man who absolutely does not get enough credit. He is one of the best, most technically proficient fighters in the world, and nobody talks about him like that. And it's a crying shame, because he absolutely is. Alright, that, again, I scored this fight, for those of you who might have been interested, I scored the fight for Romero. I gave Romero rounds, again, 3, 4, and 5. I gave him all 3 of those rounds. If you scored this fight for Whittaker, I'd have to rewatch the 4th round, because that's the only round in dispute, to actually engage in intelligent discussion over it. If you gave Whittaker if you gave Whittaker 1, 2, and 4 and gave Romero a 10-8 5th and you arrived at a draw, that might be the most accurate reflection of the action if you were to just craft out a scorecard designed specifically to represent the overall flow of the fight. But this was a great fight. I want these two to fight forever, man. I putting aside all the weight cutting drama and all of that, I want these two to fight at least once a year for the rest of my life. These two they're great individually. I love watching either of them fight regardless of the opposition. And there's just something, again, magical about when they meet up. Truly, truly spectacular fight. I hope they run it again. I don't know under what circumstances. I want another fight between these two. Maybe not immediately, but if we don't get a third fight between Robert Whittaker and Yoel Romero before one of them retires, it will be a crying shame. Pat, I want to start with you for this one, because you see a lot of the... what did you see in this fight again? There's a lot to unpack. Romero going orthodox, Whittaker's game plan, the injuries, so just your thoughts on the whole thing.
Romero fighting almost completely in an orthodox stance through the fight was a little bit surreal, considering we haven't seen that from him ever. And it was a major adjustment to make into this fight. We haven't seen that since Rocky II, when Rocky came out in an orthodox stance as opposed to his normal southpaw to fight Apollo Creed. But, there were certain adjustments that each guy you knew wanted to make going into this. And the fact that the roles were reversed so early in what we saw from their first fight, it harkens back to the great rivalries where one fight went one way, the rematch went the opposite way, but still made for such a great, entertaining fight. And here we got that. We got Romero early on using those kicks to the leg early on to try to damage Romero's leg. We got Romero needing to dig down deep and come back hard and using accurate strikes and mixing up his attack from varied angles to get to Whittaker, which was really fun to see. We got Whittaker showing this heart and grit to survive these assaults, fight through an injured limb, which was not his leg, but a broken hand this time. We saw Romero have to fight through what was likely to be at least a partially broken orbital bone off of that jab that shut his eye very early. Massive credit to his corner for being able to keep that swelling down as much as they did. That was impressive. As much as the fighters impressed me, seeing that was pretty impressive too. We saw, the efficacy, which is Robert's buzzword of the week, folks, of Whittaker against the destructive power in spots of Romero. There was so much here that was so fun. And it's a shame that we were not, given this as a title fight or else I think we'd all probably be talking about how much we'd want to see it again immediately. But because of the circumstances, we can't. I love the technical adjustments through the fight. One of the things you see about guys who use a shoulder roll defense, which you brought up with Robert Whittaker, Robert, is normally once they get tagged, they don't execute it properly for the rest of the fight. All they do is put their shoulder in front, but they don't tuck their chin, they don't adjust the angle that they're standing at. Whittaker was very cognizant of doing that because he felt Romero's power. And he didn't want to put himself in position to have to eat shots like that consistently, or he knew he might get caught and get put out. And he didn't want to do that, so he adjusted. Romero mixed up his attack from these varied angles, coming over the top with the left hook as opposed to throwing a standard horizontal left hook. He mixed up the angle on that punch. Moving Whittaker into his bad eye range, where Whittaker underestimated his peripheral vision and winging him into another shot behind it. That was impressive. There was a lot of technical brilliance in this violence, and it was so much fun to watch. Both of these guys put on what is easily my fight of the year so far, not unlike Robert. It was absolutely, for me, a top 5 UFC fight from everything that I've ever seen in the UFC, and I've seen quite a bit. I would put this up against almost anything. I loved it. I want more. Scoring, the swing round is the 4th round. I scored that round for Robert Whittaker because I believe that all the work he did through that round, especially coming back from a round in which he was badly hurt in the 3rd, to come back and hurt Romero a little bit in that round, control the majority of the 4th round, and not control in a positional sense, but he did work. He was working his jab, working some good offense, landing. I feel between that, what he did through that round, I don't think Romero landing 2-3 good shots at the end that hurt Whittaker very visibly, I didn't think it was enough to take the round away. So I ended up scoring that for Whittaker. My scorecard in terms of rounds was 3-2 for Robert Whittaker. I did not give a 10-8 fifth because I did not think Whittaker was that close to being finished. I am open to watching it again and rescoring it. But I didn't think it justified a 10-8 because I didn't see Whittaker so overwhelmed to the point of almost being finished or out of the fight. That's just me.
Real quick follow-up on that, Pat. Because we're under the new scoring criteria for this fight in particular, and the criteria for a 10-8 round shifted from nearly being finished to winning. It changed from, I forget the exact language, forgive me, but it's less
the
about
control is part of it. The
dominance
is part of it.
Isn't it just dominance? Like
one side
only
is
dominance.
dominance. The best.
My
would be the best
understanding
way
is
to
just
describe
it's the margin by which you win the round, more so than you get. So it's the margin by which you win the round, more so than.
I feel like there should be a lot of
merely
rounds.
finishing.
There should be a lot of rounds that are 10-8 where someone almost doesn't get knocked out even. You know?
See, there's definitely components of that too. But part of that to me is if you're going to give that a 10-8, did we really see anything from Romero in the first round?
No.
So you understand the point I'm making, Jeff?
I'm not disagreeing. I'm not disagreeing. I'm just talking about how I feel it is. I mean, there are a lot of problems I have with the 10-point must system and judging and scoring in general. But to me, it should not. The criteria shouldn't be more than you almost get knocked out. I feel like if you have a very one-sided dominant round, maybe not every case, but there are a lot of cases where if it's very one-sided, it could be 10-8 or even 10-7, depending on the outcome.
Such as earlier in the show with say Holly Holm and Megan Anderson.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, I feel like grappling, like overwhelming dominance with your grappling or top control can maybe be grounds for a 10-8 as well. It depends. I'm saying it depends. Fight, I
gave Holly 2 10-8s.
It depends, but I feel like we've seen rounds from Joanna Jacare where she didn't get knockdowns or anything, but it felt like those should be 10-8.
It was thoroughly one-sided.
Because they were one-sided and all you want.
She got screwed out of a couple of 10-8s, especially in the Andrade fight.
Because
there were at least 2.
Because it's cumulative damage too. But yeah, I don't want to run over the end of Pat's thing, so go ahead.
Yeah, so I can understand the one-sidedness of it too, but I didn't think it was such a working over either in terms of that it was warranted a 10-8. And I get the efficacy rule, and that's fine. But ultimately, what it comes down to is, what was the nature of how one-sided it was? Is it someone in top control working the whole time? Is it while a truck unloads? Was it positioned, held in a certain manner of time? There's a lot of variables to that, and I don't think this makes it any clearer how a round should be scored versus the damage argument, we'll call it, where the principal metric of a 10-8 round is damage to a certain degree. I don't think that makes it any clearer personally. I don't necessarily validate it either. For me, the bottom line of a 10-8 round is really more so than anything else. Was it so one-sided that you felt like it wasn't competitive, or that the other fighter, I should say, never had, a horse in the race at that point? And I didn't see that in the fifth. I didn't see it in the first. And the first is always going to be scored differently because you're not looking at it in the encapsulating factor of a whole fight. That's another thing that nobody is, addressing with this.
Fair.
is that the first round is always that feel-out round. There's, poke here, prod here, very cautious as a whole for the most of the time. You're never going to look at that round the same way you look at a fifth round of a fight or a third round in some cases. So you're holding that round to a different standard too, which I don't necessarily like either. Especially, you have a situation where you have a slow starter, a guy who's notorious for coming out, losing the first round, and then coming back strong through the next 2 or 4, depending on the length of the fight. It's just not – the efficacy thing is supposed to help clear things up. If anything, I think it makes it more vague and less discerning.
Yeah, and again, one of the things that we're going to talk about, especially when we get to the next fight, is just how there's only so much language that you can put into scoring criteria before you just wind up running into the subjective perspectives of each individual judge, or each individual person. And again, there's not really anything you can do about that, and because if all we went on was pure numerics, it'd be worse than it is now, actually. But so anyway, all right, Jeff. Again, you and I joked a little bit about this, actually. Because every fight on the main card went to a decision, I joked before these fights started that that Romero would knock out Whittaker in the second. After the second, when Romero's eye was swelling up, you kind of said, well, what's he going to do with a swollen eye? And a few minutes later, he, comes as close to knocking out Robert Whittaker as you possibly can without actually doing it. We tempted the irony gods.
Still didn't. One. So technically, I was right.
Technically, yeah. All right. But anyway,
in the words of Hannibal Lecter, technically, I was correct.
Yeah, all right. So anyway, your thoughts on this fight? Because
I had it for Whittaker, and I will explain why.
All right.
I had rounds 1 and 2 for Bobby Knuckles. Round 3, to me, it's a clear round for Romero. Is the round a 10-8 round? No, it is not, and I'll tell you what. To me, a 10-8 round, if Romero's knockdown and almost finishing Whittaker is like the main thing that happened in the round, well, I guess it was. But if Whittaker did not come back, recover, and get some of his own offense in, I would have said, yeah, that's a good case for a 10-8. But not only did Whittaker recover in that round, Robert, he managed to recover and stayed in the fight and still hit. He still did damage. He did significant damage to Romero in both rounds 3 and 5, those were Romero's biggest rounds. Those were his biggest.
A head kick in the third round.
Exactly.
Yeah.
After almost being finished.
And he didn't finish him with or almost finish him with the head kick, but that's, we can debate about
what you're saying, Joe. The fact that he's able to land it shows that he really wasn't close to being out of the fight.
Well, I mean, he was, but I feel like even if you get knocked down, a knockdown in itself is not grounds for a 10-8. If you get knocked down and
Not
you
in
can
MMA.
come back and still show you're in the fight, I feel like that's grounds for you to score. Okay, you didn't win that round, but you turned it into a 10-9 instead of a 10-8.
Yeah.
And I have the same feeling about round 5. So rounds 1, 2, 4, I give all of those to Whittaker. Those were to me, those were clearly Whittaker's rounds. Rounds 4 and 5 were big rounds for Romero. Now, we can talk about cumulative damage and open scoring, and maybe I can accept an argument that Romero won based on total or whatever. But based on
if you were
what we
scoring
have,
the fight as a whole, it goes to Romero.
right?
But,
Yeah, it was pride, but pride's dead.
All right, I can accept that argument. But based on what we have, based on the rules and the criteria that are in place, I give the fight to Whittaker. I'm fine with it being a split decision. I'm fine if people even think it should have been a draw, or maybe it should have been Romero. But I feel Whittaker showed the heart of a champion last night.
Oh,
he showed why he's the champion, why he's the best in the world, and quite frankly, I'm just gobsmacked by the transformation he went to of being just an average mid-level welterweight to becoming the top middleweight in the world. It's truly astounding. I didn't think much of him from. It wasn't even the U.S. Ultimate Fighter. It was UK versus. It was the Smashes.
Yep.
And
Canada, Australia.
He started out. I thought he was just like a good little hand. I didn't think much was going to come of him, but then he went up in weight. I didn't think he was going to have a good run at middleweight, and then right before our eyes, using his. I mean, he has a fairly strong athletic wrestling background, even though he was from Australia. I think he competed on a high level in Australian wrestling, as far as my research. But his transformation has been astounding, and I cannot say enough about just to take that, because we know Romero hits like a freight truck. And Romero has put down some of the top champions and other middleweights in the world, including Chris Weidman and Luke Rockhold, who I also think very highly of. And Whittaker took everything Romero had, and Romero's cardio, I think he paced himself a lot better last night. I think both of you would agree with that, than compared to previous fights. He paced himself very well.
It helps that he took off the first 2 rounds instead of the last 2.
Yeah, right.
Yeah.
I think but he was clearly pacing himself to save it for the later rounds. Yeah. And I think he deserves a little credit for that. But he took everything Romero had, and he took it all, and he ate it all, and he recovered, and he came back and kept fighting through it, and he still did significant damage in offense. And he is a hell of a fighter. And I am so blown away by Whittaker's growth and his transformation into a top fighter. And I hope this fight gives him the attention and respect he deserves from the MMA community that I think he wasn't quite getting before. I'm sure he's popular in Australia, as Dana White says, but I hope this fight makes him a lot more popular with American fans. My one problem is that he doesn't get this title defense on his record. It's a non-title fight. And we've been waiting a year for Whittaker to fight, and he doesn't get the title defense, and I'm not devastated or heartbroken, but I'm a little sad about it.
No, Whittaker might be my he might be my number 2, current pound-for-pound guy behind Mighty Mouse right now. I mean, he's that good. And if you read Jack Slack at all, and if you're not, you should, for anyone listening out there, he's been beating the drum for Bobby Knuckles for well over a year now. I mean, going into the Jacare fight, actually, was the first time he kind of really laid out what made Whittaker so great. And then, of course, he knocks out Jacare and continues to just, be generally awesome. This is the best fighter in the world that you do not think of that way. He is a spectacular fighter, and this was a great, great fight. And this card really needed it. It really needed this fight. As for what's next, I don't know. I mean, Romero missed weight twice, and he did it twice in a row, and in 2 title fights. I mean, granted, one was an interim, and we're all kind of glad there was no interim title that got into play, but I feel like you gotta, like, I don't know, man.
He's not getting a title shot, but, I don't think, this is a kind of a unique situation in terms of it's known how poorly he prepped for this weight cut, and that you can look at this one of 2 ways, and you can completely understand management's frustration and the thought of that, well, you know what, we have to tell him to move up. This is one case where I don't necessarily agree. I don't view it as an Anthony Johnson type situation where he's going to eat himself out of a division, especially if he reached 0.2 pounds over the limit when only bringing in his nutritionist or dietitian, whatever you want to call him, the Tuesday prior to the fight. But you have to put him in a scenario where he understands there's consequences now and let him know, Yoel, you are doing this and making this fight at middleweight. If you don't make weight, the fight's not happening, you're not getting paid, and if you don't move up to 205, we're releasing you. Just put it in simple terms like that to him, and you may see some motivation change, and you may see a more concentrated effort from him to make weight, especially knowing how close he got to becoming middleweight champion of the world. He lost the middleweight championship of the world by 0.2 pounds and 2 points on the cards. That's gut-wrenching. Whether you understand that or not, it's gut-wrenching for a fighter to have to live through that. And he's got to live a very hard lesson about what happens when you don't prepare adequately. And he's got to look at himself every day and know that he could have been this had he just done this. And that's hard. But if you're the UFC and you've had 2 amazing, high-quality fights between these guys, you don't want to pass that up from happening again. So what you do is give him another fight at middleweight as basically the deciding one as to whether or not he stays in that division. And Bobby Knuckles is moving on to somebody else anyway. Chris Weidman's been waiting in the wings now, and I think he's likely the next guy to get a shot based on the fact that he has the dominant win over Kelvin Gastelum, who's the other boy in the barrel. Yeah. So Romero the fight with Gastelum. And that way, if he wins, he justifies another fight with, the winner, with potentially Bobby Knuckles, or if Weidman pulls it off with Weidman. Or if Gastelum wins, you have an undeniable contender to the winner of the next fight.
It's going to depend on timing here because Weidman is still apparently dealing with his hand injury. Whittaker might have his hand might not be broken, but he might be dealing with a serious hand injury that might require maybe not surgery, but a bit of recovery time. So there's that. So depending on timing, it could be either Weidman or Gastelum.
And I'm fine with either of those fights. They're both good on paper, and quite frankly, I favor Whittaker over both of those guys, but we'll deal with that when we come to it. All right, your co-main event. Colby Covington defeats Rafael dos Anjos via unanimous decision, 49-46, which I hate that scorecard, because I think it ignores the reality of rounds 1 and 4, but I'll get to that. And 48-47 twice. And for the record, if you scored this thing 48-47 for Covington, fair play. There's no point arguing that. It's perfectly defensible. I think when I did this live, I had it 49-46 for Dos Anjos, which I can't stand behind as I sit here recording this podcast. For a couple of reasons. One, as I've said many times, scoring when I'm live blogging this stuff is profoundly inefficient. I include the scorecard so that you guys know where I think things are, how I saw things, but I miss stuff all the time. I'm just looking at what I'm typing, I'm fixing typos, I'm looking at, again, it's just, if you're scoring, you should be sitting there focused on scoring the fight. That is not the sole purpose of what I am doing when I am covering. So I miss things frequently. The other reason I can't stand behind it, and this actually dovetails off of that, these are... You need a really refined eye to accurately score this fight. Because there was so little. This is such a weird way to put this. There was such little effect that either guy was having. That normally that makes it easier because one or two things and, okay, this pretty clearly goes to this guy. In this instance, not so much.
But Joe Rogan told me that Colby Covington had broken him completely.
God, the commentary last night it bordered on the abysmal. I don't know what happened to them, but
It didn't border on it. Tipped right over it.
Obviously, Colby Covington got to Taekwondo, and some sort of intimidation tactic was used.
I feel like Daniel Cormier astral projected into the body of Joe Rogan for this fight, because that's the level of cheerleading that was going on just based on wrestling. And Cormier has a demonstrated history of overt bias for guys who come from an American wrestling background. Anyway, as for the fight itself, a lot of what I think we all kind of expected in many respects. Colby Covington pushed forward, got into the clinch, did a lot of pseudo body lock takedowns that weren't really takedowns, but again, sort of, and then kind of mat returns, and he ate punches. He got his striking was like.
I thought Rafael was going to beat him the hell up.
Jake Shields. That's it. That's the comparison I want to make as it pertains to Covington.
That's fair.
Now, for very different reasons. Jake Shields, much more active on the mat once he got it there. But if you look at the striking of Jake Shields, it was terrible, except that everyone was so worried about everything else he was doing, it kind of worked and kind of helped him set up his grappling. While Covington isn't nearly the jiu-jitsu practitioner that Jake Shields is, his striking is the same in the sense that it really sucks, but you're so preoccupied with his sudden entry into a double leg or his rush into the clinch that he's going to land a few punches here and there. Covington pretty clearly, I think, and again, I don't stand by whatever I typed up when I was writing this because I don't for this fight for reasons I already outlined. I think it was rounds like 2, 3, and 5 that go to Covington, generally speaking. At a minimum, if you give him those 3 rounds, I'm not going to argue with you. I think it's perfectly defensible. I think they're incredibly low-activity rounds, despite both guys working very hard, which is, again, it's this weird confluence of terms. But if you give him those 3 rounds and subsequently the fight, sure. Again, there's no point in debating it. I can't, there's not enough empirical evidence one way or another to refute or really substantiate the point. I think if you give Covington round 1, that's a mistake. There's a couple of very specific reasons for this. I think a lot of people are being confused by the wall install of Covington. And how do I phrase this? Okay. Let's start with the scoring criteria because this
pushing and fence clinching doesn't necessarily mean control.
It doesn't.
Or effective control, or that you're winning the fight or the round. I guess.
Correct.
That is absolutely correct. It's construed a lot as if your back's on the fence, you're losing, and this is just a stupid position. If you want an example, here's a great example for all of you people out there. Rewatch the first fight between Demetrius Johnson and Henry Cejudo. In almost every clinch position they find themselves in, and it's not a long fight, but they clinch a fair bit, when they're near the fence, DJ's back is on the cage. Henry Cejudo is pushing him there. At no point in that fight is Henry Cejudo winning those exchanges. Well, doesn't matter that DJ's back is on the fence.
A number of writers did score the fight like you, Robert. 48-47 in favor of Dos Anjos. That included...
I was 49-46, but again, I don't stand by that.
I myself had 48-47 for Dos Anjos. I gave Dos Anjos 1, 2, and 4. I gave Covington round 3, and gave him round 5, but not by any kind of a significant margin.
Okay, let's see. MMA Fighting, ESPN, MMA Mania, and Bleacher Report all had it for Dos Anjos, but only by 48-47.
Which is more like, even if I rewatch this and still arrive at a Dos Anjos score, it will be, I imagine it'll be 48-47.
A handful did have it 49-46, but that's like Bloody Elbow, BJPenn.com.
I mean, again, like, I had it 49-46, and I freely admit that's probably an incorrect score, all things considered.
No, they had it 49-46 for Covington, which is a little...
which is also an incorrect scorecard. Again, the only reason I want to focus on round one here is because the others are, like, they are what they are. There's not a whole lot of point to going over them. Dos Anjos was either, in some of these other rounds, he just wasn't doing enough while being clinched on the fence. And if that's the case, then yeah, I can see him losing that, because Covington is, even though his takedowns didn't really mean anything, if they're the only thing happening, they're the only thing to score. But in the first
regardless
round,
of the score, I was really disappointed with Dos Anjos' performance here.
Yeah, for two reasons specifically for me.
Yeah, you can be, but to also give credit to Covington's performance, Covington was at the intent of making this what he usually makes it, an unentertaining, boring clinch fest where not much damage is done. And to be fair to Dos Anjos, Covington is a much naturally larger guy who it's very hard to break the control of. So I understand why he had such a hard time doing it, but I thought he did effective work more often than not. And had he committed to a few things a little bit more, he would have seen a wider margin in his play. Like when he ripped body shots, Covington was visibly hurt by them, and then he would go back and get into a clinch with him, which was
But later in the fight, it looked like Covington, the few standing exchanges that there were, it seemed like Covington was holding his own.
There's two reasons that looks that way. One of them is just raw forward pressure, because look, Covington sucks when he's backing up. I mean, he is just even in fights he's won, he's only lost once. If you look at him having to fight when he's backing up, it's awful. It is just awful. When he's going forward, he mitigates a lot of his issues by just coming forward. The other thing is, again, you're so worried about his entry into either a clinch or a double leg that your hands go down. You want to be in position to underhook him immediately to prevent him from getting his hands together. And when your hands are a little bit lower, in order to, again, to block the arm position of Covington on a potential shot, your head's exposed. So he's going to land those punches. I mean, it's a great thing. If you're able to pull that off tactically, it works wonderfully. And
also, much to the trying to think of the right word to use here, to the
chagrin?
No, not chagrin, but to the viewers of this who aren't well educated on what's going on in a fight.
Oh, it does a disservice to the fans in some respects.
It does. For Joe Rogan and Jimmy Smith, let's throw Jimmy Smith under the bus too here, because he was particularly awful as well. And this is a pattern throughout the card. There's at least one other fight where we're talking about what they're telling you is going on versus what's actually happening. When Covington would throw his forward barrage of strikes, a lot of them just didn't land.
Yeah.
He's landing on the arms, he's landing on the shoulders, and they're talking him up and talking, look at this striking of Colby Covington. He's come such a long way. He's so great. He's like one of the Diaz brothers.
Which is hilarious, by the way.
And they put this narrative out to people who maybe don't watch the fight as closely as three of us do and haven't watched as long as the three of us do, where they're actually believing what they're being told about this forward pressure doing something when it's really not. Other than just serving to keep Dos Anjos occupied for a minute because he doesn't want to get into an exchange where he's potentially going to be taken down. He's not being damaged. He's not being hurt. He's not even really getting hit all that frequently. He's in a position where he's just trying to wait out this barrage so he can make a move.
Yeah, there's a couple of things about Covington's game that I do want to give praise to, because, and actually one about Dos Anjos, there's two things about Dos Anjos' game here that really disappointed me. One, as Pat alluded to, was he did not go to the body enough. He caught Covington a couple of times with that right hook to the body, and it unsettled him. and he didn't get a read on it, he didn't go back to it, and massive error on his part. On the plus side for Dos Anjos, if you watch especially the first round, and this is one of the things that helped Dos Anjos, in my estimation, be in a position to win it, and again, in my estimation, he did, his hand fighting has come up tremendously. He was really active about breaking the grip of Covington, about fighting that anytime Covington tried to get his hands together, breaking the grip, challenging it, pummeling under. Much improved aspect of his game from some of his previous outings when other guys were able to get that kind of a lock around him. So I did want to give him that. As far as Covington's game, there's a couple of things that need to be said on the positive side of it. One is that, again, like Jake Shields, his striking might suck, but it's good at distracting you and occupying you so that the rest of his game can work. And it might annoy me in the sense that I like really good striking, but if his striking is not to knock you out, it's just to set up him closing distance, then it's doing what it's supposed to do. It's functioning as intended. And that deserves to be recognized. Also, and again, this is all Covington does basically, but if he gets his hands around you, man, he just wears you down. He does not stop. He does not... He can clinch fight. That guy can clinch fight forever. You get him in a clinch... he can clinch wrestle forever. Not so sure how he'd do in prolonged, clinching with a lot of elbow strikes and knees and, really actively fighting like that, but he gets you against the fence, he's gonna duck under and go to your back, he's gonna transition to a double leg, he's gonna misdirect, he's gonna mat return. He's just going to make you wrestle him until you fall apart. Because he is an exceptional wrestler.
Doing a little updated version of the John Fitch grind, as it were.
Pretty much, yeah.
I have a question, guys.
Yeah, go ahead.
Mark Ramundi said after the fight that Colby Covington exposed that Dos Anjos doesn't respond well to fighting backwards and isn't doing well when he's being pushed backwards. Do you think that's accurate based on this fight?
We already knew that.
Yeah, and I don't necessarily even think it's so bad. I just think he's so much better coming forward.
Yeah.
But he showed at points he was capable of fighting off the back foot. It's just not his preferred way of doing things, much like Covington, who also can't fight going backward.
Yeah, I mean, if you look at some of the other fights that Dos Anjos has, even fights he's won, points when he's struggled, it's when the other guy's pressuring him. I mean, this is the
like
big
Khabib.
Like Khabib, Clay Guida, if we go back to early in Dos Anjos' career. Tyson Griffin, Clay Guida, Gleison Tebow to a degree, actually. Which is weird.
And flaming uppercuts by Jeremy Stevens.
God, that knockout. But, Dos Anjos adjusted to that by, first of all, becoming a little bit better at fighting while moving backwards. It's still not where he's very good. But if he's not good going backwards, he's gonna go forwards all the time, basically. And again, this is a known thing about, especially from someone like Raymundo who watches a lot. And I'm kind of surprised he didn't just point out that this is not an exposure so much as a reminder. This is a weakness that has always existed in the game of Dos Anjos. Which brings me to actually the other thing about Dos Anjos' performance that annoyed me. His footwork was bad. I mean, his corner kept telling him, circle, don't back up in a straight line, because that's how you get pinned on the fence. And he'd perpetually get backed up in a straight line and then put on the fence, because Colby Covington does not cut off the cage. That is not within his repertoire at this moment. He follows you.
You know what this almost reminded me of in certain instances, and I don't know how well you guys remember this particular fight, but I'll use it as this is what this reminded me of. Jake Shields and Martin Kampmann.
Oh, yeah.
Jeff, do you remember Jake Shields and Martin Kampmann at all, or not really?
I remember that fight. It was Jake Shields' UFC debut. It was a split decision.
Yes.
And I think I scored it for Shields, but it wasn't like an emphatic victory to me because it was a lot of kind of similar work.
It was a lot of here's the narrative
too, now that I think about it, just with all the clinch fighting.
Here's what the narrative of that fight was. Now, a lot of people, myself included, felt that Martin Kampmann had won the fight because he did more damage, but he didn't do himself any favors because he fought a Jake Shields style of fight.
And he got taken down more, as I recall.
He did definitely get taken down more, but it was also very much the narrative of he's fighting a Jake Shields fight. And even if he's doing better than he, should be in the minds of some, or doing enough to win the fight in the minds of some, because he's fighting Jake Shields' fight, there are going to be people who think that that's enough, that, you know what, he's getting caught up in fighting this guy's fights, he's not winning.
It was always weird to me about Jake Shields because he did that fight. Then he finally got a fight with George St. Pierre, and he stood up with him the entire time and never once tried to take the fight to the ground, which is his whole world. He could. I think he didn't even try, though. He didn't even try once.
Yeah, I don't think he... I think he knew that he was the vastly inferior wrestler and didn't want to waste the energy trying to
I disagree. He might have had a better chance on the ground against GSP than standing.
He would have had a better chance if he'd pulled guard.
I think that was one of those scenarios where he didn't even see a relevant opportunity to go there because George controlled his distance so well. And Jake Shields really doesn't know how to deal with somebody who can control distance and not let him inside.
My full interest in the fight was because GSP had become so much of a wrestler, I felt like Jake Shields was a guy who could actually either deal with him on the ground or challenge him there. So that was kind of whatever.
That's the essence of George doing, and this same strategy comes up in a couple of other fights here. Fighting where your opponent is at their worst, as opposed to where you're at your best. Jake Shields is at his worst at distance on the feet.
Yeah, be good enough everywhere that you can take a fight where the other guy isn't any good. It's not always about fighting your best fight. It's about making them fight their worst fight.
One other thing I will praise Colby Covington for is he had very good cardio for this fight. He was clearly in shape, and he didn't get tired either. I mean,
apart from taking off the fourth round, which I think was just a tactical decision on his part, guy can fight for 5 rounds.
I mean, because
I would agree with the tactical part of that as well. I think that was a smart play on him and Mike Brown and the ATT guys to tell him to take that round off because they knew he was going to need a burst for the fifth, knowing that the fight potentially on paper could have been very close. So I praise them again.
I mean, because his style is not pretty and it's not fun to watch at all, but it's exhausting. It can be just as exhausting for the guy implementing it as the person working off the fence or working off the mat. And he was able to do it for a solid 25 minutes. So.
And he looked fresher doing it in this fight than he did against Maya, and there's a reason for that.
Because he was striking the whole time versus Maya, and he's just not at all physically in condition to strike for 10 minutes at a time, much less 25.
That's the key. If you watch fights, again, you look at somebody like a Claudia Gadelha, who we'll talk about a little later. If you've looked at fights where she's grappled or struck and then had to make the switch to the other, she's usually very tired as soon as that switch occurs because she's not conditioned to doing that. Covington is a wrestler, first and foremost, and if you put a scenario in where there's going to be grinding, mauling, grappling, he's not likely to get tired because he's conditioned himself to be the best he can be at that, and he arguably is.
Years and years he's been doing that.
Yeah.
But anyway, so Covington is your interim welterweight champion. Most likely secures a fight with Tyron Woodley after this, barring randomness, because there's always the randomness. I wouldn't have given either of these guys much of a shot against Tyron Woodley, all things considered. That said, there's two things Tyron has to do, and I'll go ahead and throw these out right now. One is he can't actually back up to the fence as readily as he does normally. That's just kind of asking for trouble here. The other is make sure your punches are straight. Because Colby Covington is most likely just going to walk into Tyron Woodley's power hand. And if Tyron starts looping it, he's going to miss. If he straightens that punch out, he could knock Colby Covington's head into the fence. Very, very
Whatever
early.
you do with this fight, you have to make it the co-main event. You cannot. If you make this the sole main event of a fight card, you are tempting fate.
Oh yeah.
And Clucky way too much because, look, I mean, we know how Woodley fights. We know how Covington fights. And stranger things have happened where like fights we expect to be barn burners turn out to be flat. Ones we don't expect a lot out of sometimes turn out to be good. And I'm not saying that can't happen here, but I mean, you can't rely on these guys to have a fight on.
Bit here.
Yeah, you have to try and make it a co-main event for another fight card because
or put a really great co-main event beneath it. If you put a real crackerjack fight as the co-main event.
I'm not saying it will, but on paper, this has the potential to be one of the most rat crap title fights ever.
And considering that Tyron Woodley's previous 2 title defenses, previous three, are the 3 worst welterweight title fights ever. I mean, I said after the Maia fight that my only interest in Tyron Woodley's reign is to see how bad it can get. Also, just real quick, what do you guys put the odds at that Colby Covington drops some kind of racial slur in the build-up to that fight?
100%.
All right. Yeah, almost certainly. You know, if I'm Tyron Woodley and I want to be that guy, I kind of goad him into that. Because it wouldn't be hard. It really wouldn't be hard.
It's the only way anybody's ever going to cheer for Woodley.
Yeah.
I mean, a reporter, if you guys saw the press conference last night, a reporter kind of tried to do that.
Yeah, but that's a reporter trying to do it. I mean, Colby's not going to play with a reporter the same way he might let Tyron kind of get under his skin a little bit or jab back and forth with him. I mean, I don't want to get into it.
Bisping, I mean, if you saw FS1, Bisping was clearly having fun with him and doing a good job.
Well, Bisping actually knows how to talk and think on his feet. Covington has to look in the mirror and rehearse what he wants to say before he says it so that he doesn't stumble over everything.
I mean, look, say what you will about Bisping, but he had a good line toward Covington last night. He said, "Take off your sunglasses, you look ridiculous."
Well, I wish someone had told that to Tony Ferguson. I just want to put that out there. All right, moving on. I don't know what you do with Dos Anjos. I mean, you can match him up with anyone in the him and Wonder
Jorge Masvidal.
Him and Masvidal or him and Wonder Boy. I'd be down for either of those, actually. I'd like him and Masvidal.
Wait. What about Kamaru Usman? Does he have a fight?
Another good option.
Not yet. You could do.
I mean, look, Kamaru Usman. He's not like the most exciting fighter either, but he's due for a huge high-level fight next. He could be a future. He could be a future contender as well.
I mean, I still like Usman and Till personally. That's kind of where my head's at with him. But now again, anyone in that top 10, top 15, like you can't really go wrong matching him up with any of those guys unless he's already beaten them. But next up, boy, I felt pretty stupid watching this fight. Holly Holm defeats Megan Anderson via unanimous decision, 30-27 and 30-26 twice. For the record, I was 30-25. I gave Holly 2 10-8s. This was just an instance of Megan Anderson not being ready for this level of competition. That's really what this comes down to. You could see...
Ring rust.
Yeah, ring rust certainly played a part. You could see bits of what makes Megan Anderson good. Especially in the first round. She backed Holly into the fence and landed a really nice knee followed by an elbow, and that's really where Megan is at her best. If she's got you on the fence and can kind of maintain that distance to where she can still throw at you, that's where she hurts people. Unfortunately, she's not the best at actively maintaining it, and for a woman as big as she is, and bear in mind, Megan Anderson is a big girl. She's, 6 feet tall, walks around like 170 to 190. I mean,
she is a tall drink of water.
Yeah, she's a featherweight. There is no way that woman could ever make bantamweight. You'd have to cut off a limb.
She's legit. She is probably one of the few legit featherweight fighters who should be at MMA featherweight for women.
Yeah, unequivocally. But she was getting out-muscled in the clinch, and that surprised me a little bit. Mostly her lack of technique, because Holly's put in a lot of time and energy to make her upper body clinch game better over the last little bit, and she...
This was an aspect of her game we haven't really seen much of in her UFC career.
No, the last time we saw it was a little bit when she fought Cyborg. She was, I think her strategy there was, if I'm going to be in the clinch with Cyborg, I'm going to be the one dictating it, because if she dictates it, I'm dead. But she was really good about getting underhooks, about getting a full body lock. She had this really nice thing with her, both head position and posture breaking, to open up Anderson for really short left elbows that she landed consistently. And then once she got on the mat and realized that on her back Anderson's alternates between helpless and gimmicky, some of the knee slices she was hitting were, again, we're not talking, again, Holly is not ever going to be, Mackenzie Dern when it comes to her grappling acumen. But she clearly has put in a ton of effort into this area of her game. And, she had full mount for prolonged periods of time, and again, if we're talking about a much better... not even much. God, that makes me sound like such a backhanded thing. If she were more confident in her grappling, there were arm bars there all day long. But there was an arm triangle basically being given up at a couple of different points. But for what she was doing, it was working very well. She muscled a couple of takedowns, but she actually gets decent drive, and this is one of the things about, and if you look at women's MMA generally, across all weight classes, and we used to, and I still will whenever I see it, get annoyed at that stupid, headlock takeover or head and arm throw, because unless you're really, really good, it's a stupid technique. But even absent that one particular technique, there's not a lot of women women fighters in MMA who actually wrestle. They don't really, I don't know what it is, but there's not a lot who will change levels and shoot a blast double leg. They won't bend at the waist and just, wrestle it out. There's a couple who will, and it's very obvious when they have success that's why. Caitlin Vieja does a little bit of that. Michelle Watterson, actually, is one of the few women who will, again, shoot a legitimate double leg. And apparently Holly's getting better at that, because, again, we're not talking about technical wizardry here, but if she was going to shoot a double leg, she was going to put her shoulder into the gut of Anderson and go for that knee tap, come hell or high water. I don't know what you do with her next, because we're still pretty clearly angling for Nunes and Cyborg. But if you wanted to do Holly and Nunes, if that's kind of what winds up happening, I favor Nunes pretty heavily, but there's a handful of things that Holly can do that would make sure Nunes is paying attention, if nothing else. So, good win for Holly. Much needed win, considering the trajectory her career's been on recently. But not the best fight of the night, or even the second best fight of the night, but pretty good showing from Holly, all things considered. And Megan the ring rust kind of killed her, and there's another fighter on this card who was killed by ring rust as well. And just the lack of high-level competition that she's experienced to this point, which is a shame, but those are things you can remedy by staying at least somewhat active and staying active against a good level of competition. So I hope the UFC keeps her around. You have to keep her at featherweight because she can't make bantamweight, but there's enough, there's probably enough women at bantamweight who would be willing to, not cut as much weight and fight Megan and just let her get some more experience under her belt type thing. Jeff, I'll start with you on this one. You and Pat both predicted this one accurately. I did not. Again, shame on me. What'd you think of the fight?
I thought, it was just kind of there. I didn't think it was an especially, I won't say good, but I thought Holm looked good. We did see a new aspect of her game with her grappling. and wrestling. I mean, she looked strong and dominant, which she needed coming off the title loss to Cyborg, where, I mean, I'll give her credit in that fight. I mean, I think she did better than I thought she would, and I think
she's
what was
done
that?
better than anyone has. She's done the best of anyone against
but
Cyborg.
she still lost. So this was a good fight to get her back on track and keep her strong, because you know what, the all things considered, we're probably going to have to see her in a bantamweight title situation soon, just because we're so short on legitimate contenders right now. You might have to book Nunes versus Holm at some point, and I think that's at least an intriguing matchup for the division. So, quite frankly, I'd be okay if they booked her against Nunes for her next fight. But it was a good performance, and I liked seeing something like that out of Holm. I was not impressed at all by Anderson. I know she hadn't fought in a year and a half, but I mean, she's still fairly inexperienced. I mean, she only has she was like 8-2, 10 fights. So I mean,
yeah, go ahead.
I just wasn't all that impressed with her, and I mean, I don't know. I didn't really like her performance.
All right, Pat, your thoughts on, and maybe you can help me get some perspective on this. I mean, Holly's almost 37.
Yes.
She's like trying to actively figure out a whole new skill set, kind of on the fly at an advanced age with years of combat advanced age. Gosh, she's not dying, but so your thoughts on the fight, kind of in general there, and Holly. I mean, I'm just impressed with her dedication. There's a lot of people after the losing streak she went on that just would have said, you know what, I'm already one of the best. I've made my money. I'm out. And here she is still plugging away.
Yeah, I mean, no one's going to confuse her last night for Matt Hughes in terms of what she was doing with her wrestling. Make no mistake. Because a lot of it wasn't very technical or very well executed, but it was a lot of just grit and strength and not giving up on what she was doing that allowed her to have that success, versus Megan Anderson, who just seemed totally confused and overwhelmed by everything going on. And yeah, we probably can chalk some of that up to rust. We probably can chalk some of that up to not having fought at a level that, at this level, so to speak, that Holly and others have proven to be on in the UFC, regardless of streaks or what have you. Holly's still been world champion. She gave Cyborg the best fight we've seen Cyborg in an MMA ring. So there's good elements there in terms of what Holly brings to the table. To lose a grappling match to Holly Holm is very, very suspect of what you bring to the table, especially when you're so much physically bigger than her. And Holly's not an upper body strength fighter. Holly's weight and real muscle, if you look at her, it's in her hips, it's in her thighs, it's in her quads. That's where that weight carries. It's why she throws very good kicks. It's why she is who she is. It's why she's not necessarily an overwhelmingly devastating puncher, per se, but she does a lot of things well. Grappling isn't one of them. And you got out-grappled by Holly. With a lot of those takedowns just coming from her just being more willing to push it than you, and you stopping the defense of it at a certain point because you thought it was over, or maybe you just wanted it to be over. I don't know if Megan Anderson had a bad weight cut, because if you look at the size of her versus
That's a
Holly,
non-trivial cut. That's not easy.
Yeah, well, and again, like I'm saying, I don't know if she had a bad cut, because again,
it didn't look like she did. She made weight easily, and she didn't appear to have any problems.
Yeah, she didn't have problems off the top, but
I mean, it didn't look like her cardio was bad. I could be wrong.
It's not so much the cardio though, Jeff. It's that she was so easily physically out-muscled by a woman who's much naturally smaller than her. That's the thing of it that's really, and especially knowing her style of fighting, is she's a clinch fighter. She wants you up against the fence with her clinching you, working those long legs into knees. It's one of those weird things that just doesn't make sense when you look at it and know the particulars, which I'm thinking maybe some of this was a bad weight cut. Maybe she just wasn't confident and kind of gave up and fought just hard enough to not get finished. But one of the few things commentary got right on the night was during this fight, how her defense of Holly's grappling was almost non-existent. She wasn't shrimping to get her hips up to try to escape. Really wasn't doing anything. Maybe the moment got her, who knows? But either way, she looked completely not ready for this level of competition, for this level of experience, and it showed, and good for Holly. Holly did everything she needed to do to win.
All right. Next up, we have another heavy... Oh, God. The heavyweights. Why? Why do they exist?
Because Radulich named this network.
Tai Tuivasa defeats Andrei Arlovsky via unanimous decision, 29-28 across the board. That's what I had it. I'm not sure how people arrive at 29-28 at Arlovsky here. I thought Tuivasa pretty clearly had the first and the third. Andre had the second. There's a few things about Tuivasa here that I think this fight illuminated, both good and bad. One is that he can fight for 3 rounds. This wasn't the highest paced fight, but these guys never took prolonged breaks. They were kind of in it. And for him to still be as active as he was in the third round, after all of the fighting that had happened prior to that, including both guys landing good shots on each other, dude can fight for 3 rounds, and at heavyweight that can be a rarity. He really needs to get better at his distance striking. His leg kicks are good. He and Andre traded a few, and his were pretty clearly heavier. But his punching at distance all seems designed around him bum-rushing you a little bit. Because once he gets in close, that's where he does a lot of his best work, when he can stand in the pocket and get you with elbows, get you with uppercuts when you're not sure what's coming at you. But at distance, when he has to just kind of be technical, especially against a guy in Arlovsky who was not backing up straight, who was constantly circling, constantly being mindful of his defense, constantly looking at some of the tricks that the younger man was trying to utilize and just knowing exactly what comes of them because Andre's been around forever. But good on Tuivasa for, again, coming back after a second round that he lost, fighting like he needed the third round, and hopefully he goes back to, the gym with the knowledge that he gained here about what he needs to work on, because while there's a lot good about him, there is also pretty clearly stuff that needs work. And, I want to say this on Andre. He looked better here than even in the previous 2 fights that he won. He got hit a few times and didn't collapse. He put on an intelligent game plan. He stuck to what was working for him throughout this entire fight. He's got to be close to the end anyway, but, he actually looked like a good fighter again. So, some credit to Andre even in the loss for actually, he didn't look like a shell of himself, even in victory. His last couple of fights, they've been, hey, I can grapple, and I'm not comfortable striking with these guys. So, takedowns, yeah. Now, here he actually got in there and fought, and some of that was grappling in the clinch, some of it was striking. Just not the worst fight in the world, and Tai Tuivasa gets some learning lessons while still remaining undefeated, so hopefully he chooses to learn from them. Pat, you and I were kind of joking around with Mark about Tuivasa being Mark Hunt 2.0, so what did you see both positive and negative from him, and what did you think of the fight?
He does a lot of things in the Mark Hunt vein that we talked about, and even after we had talked about it initially, Jack Slack wrote a piece on it afterward that, kind of echoed a lot of the sentiment that we put out there. He looks for certain openings with his strikes. He is aggressive without overly committing to things. He carries his lead hand low, not to invite strikes, but to preventative to the takedown to stop an underhook from happening. And because he's confident in his ability to take a punch and defend a strike, he is fine with doing that. Those are all things he did against Andre. One of the things we talked about earlier with Robert Whittaker is that shoulder roll, which you see a lot of fighters who fight with a low extended lead left hand do. Tuivasa doesn't necessarily change his body angle well when he does it, and that allowed Andre to land some good strikes, including the one that broke his nose, which that's something Tuivasa deserves credit for too, because it was a pretty nasty break on the bridge of the nose that he fought through. I think he showed, for a guy who looks to be in the shape you would assume he's in, he showed a surprisingly good gas tank, especially for a fight that went in different ways many times. It went from a grappling section at one point to a clinch, just standing up straight in the center of the cage. It's impressive to see a guy be able to keep his composure and keep a steady pace throughout that at heavyweight, especially for someone who, not to knock him, but carries as much flab as he does. You know, you don't necessarily have to look like Charles Atlas to be the UFC champion, but there's certain indications that a physique gives as far as what kind of shape a guy's in. His physique belies a guy who's pretty good at movement and in pretty good shape, so I give a lot of credit to him for that. On the negatives, he's another one who didn't rip body shots until it was too late. There were moments where he had Andre against the cage. Andre covered his head very well, and Tuivasa took no advantage of striking him into the body until well into the fight. I think he was baited into exchanges and walked into certain punches from Arlovski. And Andre's never been great at setting traps, but he was able to land some good counter straight right hands that he walked Tuivasa into. And that's an element that Tai is going to have to adjust to. He needs to do more cutting off rather than following, which is what got him hit like that in the first place. But it was a good effort with a major step up in the level of his opposition. He won. He went 3 rounds, which people weren't sure he could do, and he went 3 hard rounds. So there's a lot of positives to be taken away from that.
All right, Jeff, what was the best heavyweight fight of the night here? What did you think about this one?
I don't know if it was the best heavyweight of the night. I'll admit,
even if you want to say that Curtis Blades is in a better spot right now.
All right, whatever.
Fight sucked.
Look. I admit I was probably a little hard in my criticism of the fight last night when I called it bowling shoe ugly.
No, you aren't.
Of Tuivasa versus Arlovski?
No, you were not. You were not out of line when you said that. It wasn't.
All right. I mean, it wasn't. But I was still a little impressed with Tuivasa and Arlovski in the fight. Arlovski, you know, in the past we've seen Arlovski get put away with shots like that. He hung in there. I was impressed with that, and I think. I don't think we've ever seen Tuivasa go past the first round before, so
nope.
At least we know he can go with 3 hard rounds. And look, we desperately need new young blood in this division, and you know, it wasn't like a star-making performance, but heavyweight being what it is, Tai Tuivasa is now in the top 10. He's 25 years old. And he hits like a truck. That's good for this division, guys. So, I mean, for that, I'm happy. And I guess it wasn't the worst heavyweight fight I've ever seen, so it's got that. It had that.
There were 2 others on this same card that were worse. One that was just abysmal, actually, but we'll get to that.
Yeah.
All right, and kicking off the main card, Mike Jackson defeats CM Punk by unanimous decision. 30-26 across the board. I thought the judges were generous. I had this 30-25. Where to unpack this? I'm not actually going to talk about much of the technique here.
I had it 30-0.
I could see 30-9. I thought Punk did enough in the first to warrant a 10-9. Barely.
What about that standing guillotine attempt?
That was the greatest thing I've ever seen.
Oh, God. All right. Well, let me put it like this. I am unduly harsh on this because of the platform on which it happened. Let me be very, very clear. I have seen fights like this, almost exactly like this, actually, where both guys just suck. One guy just happens to really suck, and the other guy just kind of sucks. And they look like this. Because, you know, Mike Jackson, if Mike Jackson were any good, he would have finished Punk in the 3rd round especially.
Do you guys know who Charlie Zelenoff is?
No, go ahead.
Jeff, do you know who Charlie Zelenoff is?
The name sounds familiar, but I'm blanking on it right now.
He's a very
Like
famous. He's a very infamous, I should say, internet boxing troll. Who,
oh yeah, I know. I know.
who he is, Jeff?
Oh my
Okay.
God. Go ahead, Pat. But yes, I know. I know the whole now. Yeah.
So I'm gonna ignore his instances.
Quite frankly, I'm angry. Now I remember who this is.
I'm sorry, Jeff. So
Like I had blocked it. Like I went down this rabbit hole. I'll tell you, I went down this rabbit hole for like an hour and a half. I was disgusted and revolted, and I had like blanked it out until you reminded me.
So I'm gonna ignore his interactions with one Floyd Mayweather Sr. and Deontay Wilder, both of whom beat him up pretty good, as expected. He got actually booked in a real professional boxing match somewhere, I believe it was West Virginia, against the fighter who he had insulted on these message boards on BoxRec.com, and because the guy had like a 3-14 record, and so they arranged a fight between Zelenoff and this guy. And obviously, with a 3-14 record against nondescript opposition, this guy's not exactly Sugar Ray Robinson. But he fought Charlie Zelenoff, and he abused Charlie Zelenoff, beat him up, and made him quit. Had Mike Jackson actually decided to push the fight here, that very easily could have been the MMA equivalent of what we were seeing.
Yeah, my point here is that, again, if Jackson were any good, this would have not gone the distance. But Jackson also sucks. He just doesn't suck as much as CM Punk does. Now, if you want, and again, I've seen fights like this because I have seen, and again, I bring this up frequently. Guys, wherever you're listening, if MMA is legal in your country, you might live in a country and be listening to me in some place where it isn't, in which case this will not apply to you. But you will probably have somewhere in your immediate vicinity at least one MMA promotion that will put on fights 4 or 5 times a year, probably, depending on the organization. They might run more frequently than that. And if you watch that kind of MMA and that kind of promotion, and I have, and I can enjoy it, you see stuff like this. And when it's taking place on that level, under those types of promotions, being unduly harsh on both guys for not being good when they're both 0-1 going into the fight is unreasonable, and quite frankly is not fair to all parties concerned. I hold the UFC and everyone who fights in the UFC to a completely different standard. Because it's the UFC. They have set themselves that standard. So, when I see a couple of guys who I know are not very good fighting, again, at a local show, it's not, again, like, there's only so much reasonable criticism you can levy at them for deciding, you know what, these guys are going to pay me. Not a whole lot, maybe lunch money. But I want to see what fighting's like. I want to see where I measure up in it. Why not? There's nothing wrong with that. There's nothing objectionable about that. And even if you're not very good, again, the totality of circumstance is such that, why am I going to yell about that? There's no reason to. Here's the difference. This is the UFC. This is the standard for mixed martial arts competition in the world. They host the best, the reasonable degree of error for best. You should never have guys without wins fighting in the UFC. You should never have guys without legitimate competition backgrounds fighting in the UFC. This should not happen at this level with this promotion. Quite frankly, it's gross. The fight itself was abysmal. Again, neither of these guys are any good, but Jackson has some amateur boxing experience and has probably been training for longer than Punk has, and wasn't dealing with a horrible weight cut, because Punk cutting to 170 is just atrocious. Like, he looks so bad. I don't want to see either of these guys fight ever again.
I do.
Well, you're also a sadist.
Yeah, I also dislike CM Punk a lot.
Maybe Punk can fight Charlie Zolinoff.
Yes! Now you're thinking, Jeff.
Oh, God, why would you even say that? Now it'll happen. But,
God willing.
In all seriousness, that's actually the kind of thing, like, this should not be happening at this level. Neither of these guys are of the UFC standard. Quite frankly, neither of them is even, like, big time, like, marginally above the regional level of MMA. Like, I'm not even talking something like the PFL or even the LFA.
This is what you would have put on, like, as a tough show. And when I say tough, I mean TUFF. I don't know if they're still around.
The old tough man competitions, yeah. It's like Yama Pit Fighting had fights like this, right?
They had Butterbean versus Pat Smith.
Where did they find this Mike Jackson guy anyway?
He's a member of the MMA media. Like he's a photographer or something like that.
I'm ashamed he's from Houston.
Okay.
He fights out of Houston.
You know what? Let's not even talk about the fight. Let's talk about the aftermath of it.
All
okay?
Right.
Can we do that a little bit?
Again, there's like nothing to talk about with the fight. It was terrible.
Punk is 1-1. He beat Chris Amann, but he lost to Mike Jackson.
Well,
it was
okay,
1-1 for the weekend.
Yeah, not where I was going with it, but
and
okay,
to be fair, I imagine the totality of the $500,000 the UFC paid him went into his legal fees.
Probably, or at least he gets to recoup that. Anyway, where was I going with this? Right. Okay, Dana White. Let's talk a little bit about Dana, shall we? So,
please.
I don't know if you guys saw the post fight.
I saw it.
Yeah. Okay. So Jeff will know where I'm going with this. Dana went on one of his typical Dana rants, as he does, about how he couldn't believe what Mike Jackson was doing in there, and that's it for him in the UFC. He's done, and all this other stupidity. And meanwhile, back in Gotham City, he's saying nice things about CM Punk and how he's a great guy, but his UFC career is done. So just to get another idea and another perspective of Dana White looking for a fight with logic, he's going to fire Mike Jackson for issuing a pretty effortless beating to CM Punk, but he's going to praise Punk about how he went out there and he tried and whatever, and yeah, he's done now.
Oh, he'll praise Greg Hardy. Watch that. And
I'm gonna let Greg Hardy get a shot in here. But that damn Mike Jackson, for half-assing that ass kicking, he's done.
No, I'll give a noted spousal abuser and man suffering likely from some form of CTE. I'll give him a shot. But boy, Mike that's unconscionable. How dare he? It's because he sucks. I mean, you'd think someone who had taken in as many fights as Dana would understand the difference between someone like Jackson carrying, because, look, this wasn't a carry job. Mike Jackson just wasn't good enough to finish him. And bear in mind, that is a damning indictment on Mike Jackson's skills.
Well, they put two
0-1
fighters on the main card, This is what you should expect. And if he's upset about it, he has no one to blame but himself. Because they could have put Blades and Overeem on the main card, and you could have, no matter what you think about Curtis Blades, Robert, the visual of seeing him elbow Overeem straight to hell and turning his face into a bloody mess could have turned Blades into a superstar.
It would have helped.
And I'm sorry, but you can't have it both ways where you want to act like you're this legitimate sport and blah, 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 and all these things that set us apart from everybody else, but you put CM Punk on the main card of your pay-per-view. You can't have it both ways. You either put the fight that belongs on pay-per-view, which in this instance was Curtis Blades and Alistair Overeem. I don't think anybody's going to disagree with that. I don't think there's anybody's going to disagree with there were two other fights from the prelim card that were better suited to the main card. Yeah, at least 2, realistically 3, but that's the way it is. But I don't think you're going to have anybody who disagrees with that notion. And the fact of the matter is, you can't pass yourself off as we're legitimate more so because we do this and this and this, but then you put CM Punk on the main card of your pay-per-view in lieu of former champions in multiple divisions, your hot up-and-comers, people who've challenged for world titles and have proven themselves time and time again. It doesn't work that way.
Look, man, Dana White has surrendered all ability to criticize Scott Coker forever. Yeah, Kimbo and Dada was abysmal. So was this. You have absolutely surrendered anything approaching moral high ground.
Yeah.
Jeff, any final thoughts on this? Then we're gonna run through the prelims because there were some good fights there.
Unlike you two, I am a fan of CM Punk and I like CM Punk, and I'm very happy. He won the case against Chris and Man.
It was a frivolous lawsuit. He deserved to win that.
Yeah, there was no basis to it.
Just because I don't know how much Chris and Man paid for his lawyers, but they were running a freaking clown show.
They were subsidized. Like WWE paid for all of that.
Well, I mean, I hope some heads are going to roll over that because their defense was like.
It was comical because there was no actual case.
Like I would call my bank. Like basically after that, I would call my bank or my credit card company. I would say, don't. These people do not get this money. It's basically Stop payments. Pretty much.
If my accountant's listening, don't let anything stop you from making payment of this check.
Look, to defend the UFC, when they brought in CM Punk, the UFC was in a different place.
About the same place they are now, actually, in terms of just having a bad year
for
pay-per-view.
They signed CM Punk in 2014, and that was before Conor McGregor went to pay-per-view.
Yep.
And that was before Ronda Rousey even really became like a $1 million pay-per-view plus buys and all that. So they were in a bit of a transitionary period at that time. So they needed draws. And now they definitely need draws. But I mean, because remember, it took Punk like almost 2 years to get to that first fight after they made the announcement that he had
longer, but
I think you can't. I mean, putting him on the Ultimate Fighter or even Tuesday Night Contenders would have been wrong. If he really wanted to try MMA, this was the worst possible way to do it.
Oh yeah, dirt worst.
The dirt worst, especially at his age, and also dealing with a lifetime of having just damage from his body, from his WWE career. And if I were Punk, I would accept this and keep training, maybe start learning Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu and taking it seriously.
Oh no, he already does. I think he's a blue belt.
Is he really?
He's with Henner. He's been with Henner Gracie since 2008 or 2009.
He's purple or blue. I can't remember which one, but yeah, he's been doing jiu-jitsu for a long time.
I can't believe he's that high level. Honestly.
Well, it's a Henner Gracie
just
belt.
train, but like don't fight. Just train, learn the discipline.
I mean, go to some grappling tournaments if you want to. Run those. I mean, like, there's so much you can do before you get in there on the biggest stage and get smashed.
If you want contact, do grappling and do grappling tournaments and things like that to scratch that itch. If you really want to compete, just don't fight. It's just not at his age and this point of his life. It's just not worth it. I mean, look, he's a grown man and he can make his own decisions and decide what's worth it or not. But I mean, he's got a beautiful wife, and if he wants to start a family some point, it's just not. He didn't do it the right way, and because I do want him to have a long and happy life, I think he should just focus on training, grappling in BJJ tournaments if he wants to compete. That's the highest he should go at this point.
Punk, I say get back out there, get back on that horse, take another fight. I've got a whole list of guys who you could potentially fight. course, that list has myself on it, and I would actually pay you. I would pay you to fight me. Please, God, let it happen.
I mean, because think of what you're doing to AJ Lee by having to make her watch you get beat up like that. It can't be good for her mental health or well-being, and we don't want anything bad to happen to AJ Lee. And you know what? That was a hell of a standing guillotine attempt for a guy who was owned. I about jumped out of my seat when I saw him go for that standing guillotine.
I told Rob last night when we were watching the show, I was like, my God, his real kicks are worse than his fake ones.
Oh, God. Let me say this. I know how hard it is to fight. I've never fought professionally, but I know how difficult it is. I have no interest in fighting professionally. I've been involved in martial arts for a significant portion of my life. I should never watch a professional fighter and think, you know what, I could take that guy. That thought has literally never crossed my mind at any point watching any other UFC fight. I will make a minor exception for all the early tournaments because there were some weird guys there. But in anything approaching the modern era, I watched this fight. I watched the two of them and went, you know, I kind of like my chances. That just should never happen. Especially because, again, I know that, like, the average guy in the UFC who's, you know, a 500 UFC fighter, like a 500 record, but who's been fighting for 6 years, and everyone was like, oh, man, Cahal Pendred, right? A good example of this. There were people saying that, you know, CM Punk could fight Cahal Pendred when he debuted. No. Look, Cahal Pendred might suck relative to the average UFC fighter. Relative to anyone on the street, he's gonna smash you. And I said frequently, Cahal Pendred kind of sucks. I mean, there's another one, Artem Lobov, right? I've said before, Artem Lobov sucks.
Oh, he sucks.
But you put him against pretty much the average guy walking the street, he's gonna smash him. Because he has put in so much time and so much energy into fighting. The fact that he's as bad as he is after putting all that energy in is pretty telling, but even me, and I'm bigger than Artem by a significant margin. But I'm pretty sure if I were to, get in the ring with Artem Lobov, yeah, he'd probably beat me. Because he's a professional fighter. You give me 6 weeks, hell, you give me 4 weeks of actually training, and I could probably take either CM Punk or Mike Jackson. And again, that should not be true of anyone on the UFC roster, and that thought should never cross my mind because I am not stupid enough to think that because they're struggling with another top-level athlete, I would have a chance in hell against them. Because I know the difference. Alright, but that was the main card, so let me run through the prelims here, because there were some good fights. Some weird split decisions. There were some weird scorecards last night. Curtis Blades defeats Alistair Overeem via TKO elbow strikes in the 3rd round. Curtis Blades has a very limited game. It is all blast double wrestling, and then assaults from top position. He doesn't even pass that much.
Nope.
Or that well. But if you give him space and he's on top of you, he will unleash hell. And he's actually not that bad about trying to get other things set up off of his feints for his takedowns. He landed a couple of good punches on Overeem that were, he kind of fake the level change and then come up with a punch and land. He landed a pretty clean shot on Overeem, and I think it was the 3rd. And I think this is kind of damning of Curtis Blades' power, because he landed clean on the chin of Overeem, and Overeem didn't fall down. He didn't even fall backwards into the fence. He just literally walked backwards. And Overeem falls over in a stiff breeze. But if Blades can get that double leg and he can get on top of you, you're in for a world of hurt if you're not very, very careful. Claudia Gadelha. Man, she looked different for this fight.
Yeah, you made one particular comment about that look, didn't you?
I'm never going to live that down, and I'm not repeating it here.
Guys, if you'd like to know it, hit me up on Facebook or the social media of some kind.
Let me be
I will
okay. No. Look, okay, hang on. I will own up to this. I'm not going to repeat what I said, but I will own up to it. There was a commenter in on the comment section for the live coverage that basically echoed my sentiment. So if you scroll down through those and find some of the ones about Claudia, I'll let you draw your own conclusions. But I mean, she looked thicker through the body too. Like her abs are usually more defined than this, and her back as well. Like there was just, I don't know what it was, but she didn't look nearly as muscularly defined as she normally does. Thicker through the waist, not the hips, but the torso. Just, I don't know if this was a conscious decision on her part to add a little mass instead of just add muscle at the expense of definition, which is, it's a valid thought. If you wanted to, again, there are people who just don't go for definition; they go for mass, which again, it works.
And to be fair, after what she had to deal with Jessica Andrade and how that fight went, it's not out of the question that was her thought process.
Yeah, but I don't know. Again, she just looked different. And
it's not hard to believe she got some type of surgery. A lot of female fighters have. Maybe not a lot, but a number of them have.
Could be. I will not discount that possibility, but I mean, really, she needs to take a fight at flyweight, man. I mean, if she wants to come back down to strawweight after that, fine. But let's see let's see how you perform. Again, when I say look like, and I don't want to come off like some misogynistic prick, but because I've made that observation about men as well. Like,
yeah, leave that to me, Robert.
Fair enough. That's why I have you. Because again, I've made that observation about male fighters and the body change that they've gone through. If you want another example, I think we all mocked Jake Ellenberger when he got off the gas. Because he had there's like a 2-fight stretch when his physique just deflates. It's hilarious. But she wins a split decision over Carla Esparza, 29-28 twice, and then won 29-28 for Esparza. Claudia faded in the third. You can set your watch to the 7-minute mark when Claudia Gadelha starts fading in a fight.
This was different, though, and we'll get to it when we roll through, but
yeah.
There was one thing you and I talked about when it happened, and we'll go through that.
Yeah, I'll let you talk about that one, because you're the one who brought it to my attention. But I would really like to see her again. Like, just take a fight up at flyweight, and let's see how you perform. Let's see how you feel at that weight, because 115 is a significant cut for her, and she's not in the best spot to contend for the title. So, I mean, I don't see the harm in taking a fight up at flyweight. At featherweight, Mirsad Bektic defeated Ricardo Lamas via split decision. I did not see this as a split, but there was 129-28 for Bektic, 129-28 for Lamas, and then 30-27 for Bektic. I think I was 30-27 for Mirsad. Not the best fight in the world, but if you're into wrestling exchanges, they had some good ones. They had some really interesting infighting, some head position decisions. And I want to give Lamas some credit in that third round especially. He knew he needed a finish, or at least a big round, and he kept baiting a guillotine choke on Bektic that got close once or twice. But I just want to give credit to Lamas for coming out in that fight, finds himself on his back and knows, okay, I still have to try and win this, and used every trick that he had to try and do that. But big win for Bektic. There's some issues with that man's game that really need to be addressed. One, his persistence in looking for grappling when he's winning in the striking department. It's a big problem he has. That's literally what cost him the fight with Darren Elkins. Had he not done that, he would have smashed Elkins, but he did and got knocked out because of it. In your worst heavyweight fight of the evening, and one of the worst fights ever, Chris De La Rocha defeats Rashad Coulter via TKO in the second round. This fight reminded me of, and I can't remember the other participant. This is a weird callback for anyone who might remember it. But on the 10th season of The Ultimate Fighter, there was an all-heavyweight season. Pat, you might remember the other participant in this fight, but there was one fight, one of the preliminary fights, one of the first rounds. And I think Wes Shivers was one of the fighters. And I can't remember the other one.
Wes Sims or Shivers?
No, Shivers. Guy looked kind of like a male model in the face, not Wes Sims.
I might remember because I was actually covering this for 411 initially.
Oh, you poor man.
Yeah.
But they have this.
It was.
Sorry, what was that?
Oh God, give me a minute to think.
No,
Not McSweeney.
No,
Was
not
it McSweeney.
No. Oh God, it was the guy that Marcus, what's his face, was really tight with.
McSweeney?
Marcus Jones.
Yeah, because Marcus Jones was friends with him, and after this fight, there was some thought that he couldn't fight anymore because his eye got busted up. And then,
Scott Junk.
That's it, Junk. Think I'd remember that name in association with this fight.
Scott Junk got against Matt Mitrione. Is that the fight you're talking about?
I might be misremembering them, but no, I could swear it was Wes Shivers that was involved in this, because they had a kind of they had a really crappy Rock'em Sock'em first round.
Shivers only fought. Shivers fought McSweeney and got taken out.
Okay.
Yeah, and Mitrione beat up Junk, if I'm not mistaken.
Then
I might be misremembering them. Then, but it might have been McSweeney. It might have been the McSweeney fight because they have this weird first round that is like everything that is crappy heavyweight brawling in the worst way possible, and they come back from commercial between the rounds, and you see Dana White giving him a standing ovation, like pacing around between rounds, going like, "Yes, this is a fucking fight." And then they spend 3 minutes of the next round literally bent over with their hands on their knees, sucking wind, and watching Dana go from jubilant about crappy fighting to just, oh, these guys both suck, and they were just standing there, and oh, this was the worst thing ever. It was hilarious. This fight reminded me of that, because a bunch of people were, they were hitting each other in the first round, and yeah, but they both sucked, and they were landing, but neither of them could keep a pace. And then we get into the third round, and there's a good 2-minute stretch in the second round when Chris De La Rocha could have stopped it if he could land 4 punches in a row.
Oh,
and he couldn't muster the energy to land 4 punches in a row. It was so sad. I think the ref stopped this because we were all sick of it. And then on Fight Pass, Anthony Smith knocks out Rashad Evans with a knee 53 seconds into the first round. This was textbook.
Hi, Rashad.
Just hard crossface from Smith to kind of break the posture. You then use that to leverage down the upper body over at an angle and knee the exposed face. Smith looks good at light heavyweight. I mean, he'd been cutting to middleweight before this, and that's kind of crazy. But, I mean, he just physically looked good at this weight. Your upset of the evening. At flyweight, Sergio Pettis defeats Joseph Benavidez via split decision. There was 129-28 for Benavidez, 29-28 for Pettis, and 30-27 for Pettis. I think I was 30-27 for Pettis.
You were.
Sorry, 1 second. I need a drink here.
Didn't we all after this card?
I don't consume alcohol, you know that.
Don't worry, I do enough for the both of us.
This was simultaneously the best Sergio Pettis has ever looked and the worst I've ever seen Joseph Benavidez. He looked rusty. His striking he's always had kind of chopping punches, but he's always done them deliberately. Here he was flailing, and he couldn't finish a takedown. There was no drive on his double leg. And he looks disturbingly like Eminem when he has that bleached blonde hair. But he just looked like a guy who was really rusty. And Sergio did a good job of fending off takedowns, of striking at distance. I mean, he was doing the same step back, straight right counter that he always does. And I don't know why Joseph never adjusted to it, but just, again, Benavidez, this is the worst I have ever seen him look. And this was also the best Pettis has ever looked. And that confluence, just biggest win of Pettis' career. At lightweight, I was exactly right on this one. I do want to pat myself on the back because I called Charles Oliveira defeating Clay Guida via guillotine in the first round, which is exactly what happened because Clay Guida just is happy to dive at double legs, especially when he's uncomfortable, and leave his neck out there, and Charles Oliveira has been known to grab a guillotine in his time. And kicking everything off, Dan Ige, man, he put a beating on Mike Santiago for 50 seconds. I don't think Santiago landed a punch. I don't think he landed a kick. I don't think he I don't think he did anything defensively. This whole fight, Ige just steamrolled him. So good on Ige, man. That was a whooping. So again, top to bottom in execution, there were some bleh fights here, but a really strong card even in execution, all things considered. Pat, I'll start with you because you had a few things you wanted to bring up. What are your burning desires here? What do you want to talk about?
So we'll go back to commentary again, because during the Sergio Pettis-Joe Benavidez fight, Robert, you talked about constantly how commentary felt that Benavidez was clearly winning this fight.
They were so far up their own ass on that one.
Yeah,
I thought Pettis pieced him up pretty decisively in serious places.
Yeah, so again, going back to that, we're talking about how commentary was terrible in their little cheerleading rah-rah during the Colby Covington Dos Anjos fight, and to a lesser extent, Whittaker Romero. They were pretty far up our friend our friend Robert Whittaker's butt. During the Sergio Pettis-Joe Benavidez fight, they completely misled viewers as to what was actually going on, and couldn't understand how Sergio Pettis got that decision. During the same thing, they were watching the Carlos Esparza-Claudio Gadelha fight just like we were, and somehow nobody picked up on the fact that Gadelha pretty visibly injured her leg when she was hit with the right hand by Esparza in the first round. Really, the only thing Esparza had in the first round was that right hand, and it wasn't Claudia being hurt by the punch. We found out in the aftermath, but it was visible during that something was wrong. She blew her knee out when that happened. And to fight on with one leg and still clearly win that round to begin with, clearly win the second round, but not as decisively. And then she lost the third round clearly. Carla definitely controlled all of that. But again, commentary's painting this narrative of this is real close. It looks like Carla finished real strong and putting over Carla the whole time when there's really not a case for her to have been made to win that fight. Ignoring a lot of the good stuff in Bektic Lamas, which, to be fair, I wasn't overly thrilled with that fight because it wasn't an action fight. But I also understand it's not for lack of effort. It's just a lot of the things they were doing were stalemating each other like you see in a good wrestling match. It's just they're very evenly matched in a lot of ways, and a lot of their techniques counteract the other one, where you don't necessarily get action, but you get, some high-level stuff just canceling out. Which to a non-purist who's in there looking for entertainment, no, it's not the most fun you'll have, but it's very interesting from an insight perspective to get when you see that. So, commentary as a whole was terrible throughout this, and if there's a bigger loser than CM Punk on this card, it's the combination of Joe Rogan, Jimmy Smith, and John Anik, who is somehow still there. I don't know why. He's terrible. Literally, maybe the worst.
Give another year for Brendan Fitzgerald to become generic sportscaster on the lead desk.
Yeah, John Anik is maybe the worst play-by-play announcer I've ever heard in any sport, period. And that includes Mike Goldberg.
Wow.
Still better than Todd Grisham.
I wouldn't even go that far. Grisham's actually pretty competent when it comes to calling soccer, at least.
Yeah, that's fair.
So I'll give at least Grisham that end of it.
I also don't mind Grisham's K1 commentary when I can find it.
Yeah, he's usually on the ESPN cards of it, but that being said, this commentary is atrocious. Something really needs to be done about it as a whole, because they're completely disservicing the viewership and listeners by what they say. They're painting a distorted picture of what's happening. And, Joe Rogan made the joke earlier about the conspiracy. It's not really a joke when you guys cheerlead and rah-rah for certain instances throughout the card. It's a deliberate notion by you guys to paint a picture of what you want people to see happening as opposed to what's actually going on. And that was rampant throughout this card, more so than a lot of other cards I've heard in recent memory, and even the ones that include Daniel Cormier when he sees a wrestler involved from the United States. It was disgusting. That said,
did Cormier actually call one of Khabib's fights?
Yes.
That was so hilarious.
Yeah.
Because, they're friends. I can't expect him to be completely objective when you're literally calling a, the fight of a good friend and training partner. Like, there's only so much objectivity you can really realistically expect there. But man, that was funny.
Yeah. That being said, good win for Curtis Blades. Good win. Did what he had to do effectively and decisively. Really opened up Overeem. Very nasty on the finish. This is not a guy you want to let get on top of you. I don't necessarily like his odds against a Stipe or even a Cormier. But get him in there with some other guys. Get him in there with Ngannou. Let's have them fight to a decisive end.
You can do a rematch.
Yeah. Yeah, let them fight to a decisive end. For Overeem, I don't know where you go from here. It's, maybe Arlovsky, two former champions again later in career, both on the downside. It's been a little while since they fought. I think it was, 2 years, give or take?
Yeah, give or take.
Yeah, you could do that, or put him in with maybe Stefan Struve and another rematch.
He's fought everybody. That's the real That's the
reality of it. Yeah, he's pretty much been in there with everybody, so it's hard to go forward without doing a rematch. But those are the two I think would probably make the most sense at this point. For Claudia, which a good win, and a lot of credit to her for fighting through blowing her knee out, which is horrendous. Like we talked about in the second round, there was a takedown she scored on Carla that really wasn't any kind of technical takedown by any means. It was almost like Holly later in the night.
Just guts, grit, and the will to get down there, and you will not stop me this time.
Yeah, so I was impressed with that, knowing, again, maybe I knew more than the commentary did, which wouldn't shock me, that clearly she had something wrong with her leg, and to still get the drive and get the takedown and secure top position, that impressed me. From here, if she's going to stay at strawweight, maybe like Michelle Watterson is a good option to fight. For Carla, who's kind of, at this point, destined to be among the 3 worst UFC champions there have ever been, unfortunately for her. I don't know what you do, really. There's a lot of bodies at strawweight. There's not a lot of interesting bodies at strawweight, and especially because she's not in a good position. Maybe you put her in with Randa Marcos or, someone. Yeah, in a fight I didn't agree with, but maybe you
really? You thought Carla won that fight?
I don't know. It was back and forth. I think I had Randa at the time winning, but I thought there were points where Carla actually had some success. So it's one of those ones where it's like, I have to reevaluate it.
Right.
There's not, there's no point to her fighting Rose, obviously, because even though she's got to win over Rose, which they brought up, she's clearly not in any kind of contention for the title. It's tough to decide what to do with her. And she won't fight like a Felice Herrig because they're teammates now.
Yeah, you could do the Joanna rematch, just because I'm a sadist in some respects.
Yeah, maybe Joanna wants to get well fighting. That would be good for her. Bektic, loved what I saw. Again, not necessarily from an action standpoint, but that he was able to hang with Lamas and do such a good job against him. There's a lot of potential for Bektic. Maybe you get Bektic in there with like a Frankie Edgar.
Ooh, that might be a bit much for him at this point, but I like where your head's at. Yeah,
and then Chris De La Hoya and Rashad Coulter cut them both.
Didn't Cub just lose?
To what's his name? He just
Frankie,
lost a rematch.
Right?
Yeah.
Yeah, give me Bektic and Cub.
I say give me Bektic and Frankie. Give me Cub and Lamas.
You want to see Cub and Lamas again?
Yeah.
Have they fought before?
I'm pretty sure it was like almost. Gosh, I'm trying to think of how long ago. I know Lamas beat him, but I'm trying to think. That might have been both of their UFC debuts.
Hang on. Cub Swanson. No. It was Lamas' second fight in the UFC after he knocked out Matt Grice. It might have been Swanson's debut.
Okay, that makes sense. I knew it was fairly recent after the WEC folded, but
yeah, that was 2011. Yeah, okay, we can do the rematch.
Yeah. So that's kind of my thoughts and where they're at. As far as the prelims, bye-bye Rashad, retire, or go to Bellator, whatever you want to do. Anthony Smith, get him in the mix.
Light heavyweight needs it.
Yeah,
badly.
Put him in with Shogun. Let him go on a Faded Legends tour. Sergio Pettis, man. What about like Sergio Pettis, Ray Borg?
I could be down for that.
Yeah, something. They're not going to cut Guida, unfortunately. So maybe put him in with like Nick Lentz, Oliveira.
I think you keep Guida. Let's do the. Diego Sanchez still fighting?
No, he's fighting mentally handicapped individuals to make them feel good and losing decisions to them.
Didn't he? No, he got armbarred.
Yes.
But no,
yeah.
You need to keep Guida fighting. If you want to keep Guida around, I think you have to give him the nostalgia tour. Let him fight a lot of the guys that he because he beat Joe Lozon, but that type of guy who is of that same era.
Well, what about Nick Lentz? Like I said, Nick Lentz is a guy who's been around for a while.
I mean,
Lentz
will jump on a guillotine, so.
Yeah, exactly. Glad you like where I'm going with that. Oliveira, this was supposed to be, if I'm not mistaken, Oliveira versus Bobby Green.
Yeah. No. Guida and Green. Oliveira
stepped in. Okay, so then let's do Oliveira and Green. And then I didn't see any of Ivy Santiago, so I can't really offer you much on that.
It's a 50-second ass whipping. Ige just steamrolls him. It's almost comical.
Okay. Well, you know what? Featherweight needs some blood, too. We talked about how featherweight went from being real great to real top-heavy. Get Ige in there with, a top 10 guy at this point. I think he only lost to my guy Arce, so...
All right. Jeff, again, interesting group of prelims. What do you want to tackle from it?
Curtis Blades, man. I know you're probably not high on Curtis Blades and giving him the credit he deserves right now, Robert, but that visual of him delivering those elbows, man.
Blades is a formidable fighter who is also limited. That's just my assessment. That's not a knock. There's a lot of very formidable fighters who are omnidirectional.
I thought he looked better last night. I thought he looked considerably better last night, and he wasn't content to just walk away with the decision. He actually tried to finish Overeem, and he looked good doing it, whether Overeem's chinny or not. Look, Arlovsky is chinny too, and Tai Tuivasa wasn't able to finish him.
Yeah, but Arlovsky's, in that same vein, just Arlovsky's chinny, but he's so intermittently chinny. It's like the
it's
weirdness.
A mental thing with him.
The weirdness of Arlovsky's chin is, Overeem's been chinny for years.
Overeem is still dangerous,
Yeah.
even though he is very chinny and has been knocked out by people like Ben Rothwell.
Overeem and Arlovsky, I think, are the two most knocked out heavyweights in UFC history.
Along with Stephen Struve.
I got to tell you, I think you're not giving Curtis Blades enough credit. He's clearly getting better, and he's a good fighter. And it was really annoying to me the other day when John Morgan's talking to Overeem saying, like, oh, Curtis Blades, he's this up-and-coming guy. Look, Curtis Blades, whether you like it or not, he was in the top 5 going into this fight. So, this was a fight between two top heavyweight contenders. And whether you like it or not, Curtis Blades is probably going to be one of the next people fighting for the belt very soon.
Oh, yes, he is.
Depending on what happens with Stipe versus Cormier and Ngannou versus Lewis, Blades is right in that conversation.
Absolutely.
And if someone hurts and falls out, because we know that's kind of what determines title shots these days, he could be in a title situation next. So good on Curtis Blades.
Yep.
Bektish versus Lamas. I think I did score it for Bektish. I was a little disappointed with that fight, but I still like Bektish. I hope that's it for Evans. He does not need to keep fighting anymore. I think Evans has had his chance for a comeback, right?
Oh yeah.
And I feel like after this, like
it's Bellator time.
He might.
He will.
Because fighters have a sickness. It's an addiction. And look at Chuck Liddell. And I don't want to see that happen.
We can get the Evans-Liddell rematch in Bellator in 2019.
I feel like Evans has just been in denial, and he's having trouble letting go. and it's disappointing. Anthony Smith, I mean, I think he's a good hand to have around, like a guy you can keep on your roster. But to me, the best I think Anthony Smith can do is just get impressive wins over these washed up guys who are almost 40, basically. Rashad Evans, Hector Lombard. He's not going to beat anyone. I don't see him ever beating guys who are actually good. But he can you can put him in there, fill up a card. Oliveira got a good submission win over Clay Guida. And yeah, De La Roca versus Coulter was one of the worst heavyweight fights ever.
Oh, it was so bad. All right, that's
UFC.
Hey,
how did you guys have a for Gadelia or a Esparza?
I had a for Gadelia.
Gadelia.
Pat?
Gadelia.
I mean, I think it was a mistake I think it was Esparza's corner told her it was 1-1 going into the third. Because I think...
Yeah, they did. They told her it was 1-up. Gadelia's corner told her, you're up 2-0, do what you need to do, and protect your leg.
Because I think I had the first round for Gadelia, and I think the second round was kind of close.
Second round was kind of close.
Bad cornering.
Yeah.
I think hurt Esparza there.
I mean, worse.
Which is funny because I was going to say it's funny because on air, Jimmy Smith starts ripping Gadelia's corner for telling her you're probably up 2, but protect your leg and be careful.
But I mean, Esparza did look better there.
Esparza,
I mean,
she had more.
She showed a lot more, I think, than she usually does.
Yeah, she fought. She came to fight for this fight, and that's more than can be said of a lot of her previous outings.
She did, but she lost an. She did, but she lost an ass-kicking contest to a one-legged woman.
Also true. All right. Again, that was UFC 225. Thank you to everyone who followed along, who came by for either the live feed or read the coverage after the fact. I was not really aware of this necessarily, but I feel like I want to address it very briefly here. There's a surprisingly high number of people who get the majority of their results, and I hate to say knowledge in the sense that I am some fount of wisdom, because I'm not, but I am like the primary touchstone for a few people when it comes to the MMA world, which is like terrifying on so many levels. But thank you guys. Somebody brought that up because whenever we have one of these weird fights that's kind of down on the card, you know, the Punk fight, when Lesnar fights and it's not the main event, when you get something like that, I try to make a point to thank everyone who's not a regular reader of what I do. You stop by just for the novelty, or, you know, whenever you have if you happen to have a really big fight with a name that draws in a greater audience, and you know they might check out at a certain point, I try to make it a point to thank everyone who comes by who doesn't regularly. I mean, thanks to all you guys who stop by regularly too. But I like to get a feel for the people who don't consume my work on a regular basis necessarily, or who aren't up to their, you know, proverbial necks in MMA culture. To, you know, make sure that they can follow what I put out. Because that's one of my big concerns. I don't want to get too bogged down in minutia. I want to make sure that what I write is readable to people who don't really follow the sport that intensely. And again, I just want to be welcoming to casual audiences as well as hardcore audiences with what I do, for however big my audience is on any given card. And somebody just kind of brought up that they don't watch a lot of MMA real time, but they usually read my recaps and whatnot, and it's just weird to think that of all the people out there you could read, and there's a lot of them, and some of them are better than me. A lot of them are worse, but some of them are better. That you guys come to me, and I can only encourage you to keep doing so, because I shouldn't be driving away clicks in business. But I just wanted to say thank you for that. It's the weirdest thing for me to think about under those terms. But thank you all for reading and for following along. I have no earthly idea what you did what I did to deserve anyone reading what I do, because I'm incredibly...
You do a good job, Pat. And it's not, and you want to know what else? It's not flowery. You don't write flowery at all. You write
I need more
good,
flowery.
solid You write good, solid copy that's not flowery, and I can't stand flowery, like, over... And when I say flowery, it's like these writers who have their heads up their own rears, and they like the smell of their own farts, and they write really just pretentious, extraneous, or throw in really extraneous garbage into their writing, and you don't do that, and you're honest, and you're to the point, and that goes a long way, especially for me.
I save the extraneous stuff for when I write an actual column. That's when I get extraneous.
Well, that's where it belongs.
Thank you, both of you, for that. It means a lot. So anyway, thank you to everyone who reads and follows along. If you agree with me or not, I've had disagreements with people in the comments section. Thankfully, they're all civil. I don't mind differences of perspectives and opinions. I really don't. And just because we disagree doesn't mean we have to be snarky or nasty to each other.
The two falsest narratives out there are that to respect somebody and to love somebody, you have to agree with everything they say, and that if you disagree with one thing somebody says, you hate them.
Yeah. So thank you to everyone for that. I try to be a little bit active in the comments section between fights if I have enough downtime. So again, thank you to everyone. Thank you to all the the first timers or the infrequent visitors. Thank you to all the long-standing guys who are there week in and week out at odd hours of the morning, and in some cases because the UFC hates me. But I appreciate you guys, and you are baffling and humbling at the same time. So thank you all very much for that. I profoundly appreciate it. All right, on that needlessly prolonged note, Jeff, what's in the news? Any major news items from the last week or so we want to talk about?
Oh, sorry. So, okay. So I think we have some better clarification on the hand injury for Robert Whittaker. Based on the X-ray that was released after the fight, it looks like he has a broken thumb, and it is clearly broken, split in two. It's actually an interesting picture. So that's probably why his hand.
If you have it, I'd like to see. I'm a gore.
Here, I'll
no, you wouldn't.
I'm weird like that. I don't mind looking at weird stuff like that.
I'll tell you this much. It doesn't look as nasty. Remember the jaw break for Stipe Miocic?
Yep. No, not Stipe. Struve. Struve with the broken jaw.
I didn't say Stipe. Stefan Struve with the broken jaw. It's not quite as nasty as that, but it's like, eek. Like, yeah. Like, anyone could tell. Like, a 3-year-old could tell. Like, yeah, it's broken. It done broke. I don't know how long that would normally take to heal. But he has a clear break in his like the upper part. It's like the upper part of his thumb, close to like the upper knuckle, not the tip knuckle, but like farther
the
back.
Second metatarsal. Excuse me.
Yeah, I think you might see. So it's his right thumb.
That sucks, man. Thumb breaks are nasty.
So yeah. Now, this comes from Dana White, so take it with that grain of salt, but apparently Rashad Evans told him he's done. He's retiring from MMA.
Oh,
so.
No, that's the third. Like, that's the... Oh. Yeah, no.
Yeah.
That's the third bone in your hand, and that is a nasty break.
Yep.
But yeah, that's not the first one by where your nail is, or even the second one where it kind of comes out of the palm of your hand. It's that third bone that connects to the wrist. The one that actually lets you, turn it into an opposable thumb rather than simply another appendage.
And it's like that. Yeah, it's like split off, and it's like
it's
busted.
Off. It's a full fracture all the way through.
All the way. Yeah,
Clean
like it's
break.
not even partial. It's all the way through. It's like sliding off. Like we're lucky
and he still technically beat Yoel Romero with that.
Yeah.
Bobby Knuckles is a monster, guys.
So Dana White says Rashad Evans is done, and if he is done, I think he has a lot to hang his hat on. He has a lot more than I think other fighters. even though he never was really a dominant champion, I think he has a lot to be proud of if this is it for his career, and I hope it is. You know, and I think he has a lot to offer the sport outside of fighting. I think he's been doing analyst work for the better part of 10 years, and I think he's a fairly good analyst, so he can do that.
I wouldn't call him a good analyst. I think he's a good wrestling coach prospectively. I think he understands a lot of principles that you can do well in applying, freestyle and collegiate style wrestling into MMA. As an analyst, no, because I've seen him say some really dumb things that a fighter shouldn't say. So I won't agree with you on that, Jeff. But there is definitely room for him to contribute as far as from a coaching perspective. Which again, I happened to cover the season of Tough he was a coach on, and for some reason I've seen a lot of seasons of that show. He was pretty competent in dealing with his guys and plotting strategies. A lot of that, obviously, probably dealing with Greg Jackson for as long as he did, rubbed off on him. So he, and again, I know he's not there now, but certain things you just carry with you. If he learned those principles, he could be a very effective, at least some type of coach within an MMA gym.
I mean, he did a good job at the Black Zillions, and I'm sure he groomed a lot of good guys over there.
Yeah, and there were transitional guys there who were not fully into their MMA careers who he worked with and helped. I don't doubt he can still contribute that somewhere, some way, but his fighting days are clearly over, and he needs to understand that before things get very bad.
Yeah, I just hope he accepts it and doesn't try to go to Bellator or weighin or whatever.
Yeah, but something tells us, I'm sure, that Bellator money is going to come a knocking.
Dude, that Liddell rematch, because we all know Chuck likes to avenge his losses.
I mean, we're already talking Chuck Tito 4.
Okay. Did we get the Yair Rodriguez? He is coming back and fighting.
We talked about that last week.
Ronda Rousey is being inducted into the UFC Hall of Fame, announced last night. You guys want to touch on that?
She deserves it in a pioneer type sense, which is funny because she's in the modern category. But I don't think anybody's going to deny that she's the reason that there is female fighting in the UFC.
Yeah, an unbelievably important figure in the history of the sport, largely in the sense that it opened it up to 50% of the human population on the world's biggest stage.
I think not just that, but also WWE. I think Ronda Rousey is a major factor in why the women's revolution happened.
That's entirely possible that her impact on the culture generally kind of helped tweak things in that direction.
I think a lot.
Harvey Weinstein.
Well, no,
Ouch. Ouch.
That's not what I meant. I meant from a WWE women's wrestling standpoint. I think a lot of the top WWE superstars have talked about Ronda Rousey sort of starting that kind of wave for them. I guess that sense in showing women, I don't want to say badasses, but showing women as tough, durable fighters who are great, who are athletic, and can headline a card, even though it's scripted, but they can draw a similar level of fandom, even though they're women. And quite frankly,
I have another reason to be mad at her, because she's the reason Seth Rollins gets less time on Raw now.
Oh my!
Well, look, we're all better off with less Seth Rollins, all right?
Misha Tate had her baby. Congratulations to her.
Misha Tate was doing full-on MMA workouts before she had her baby. So that was pretty cool to see. And, apparently...
Someone
totally wanted to reduce labor. There are worse ways.
Yeah, I have done CrossFit workout, and I have seen pregnant women in CrossFit workouts not long before giving labor. I don't know how smart that is, but it's
at that point the baby is pretty well developed. So you're just trying to when my mom was pregnant with two of my three younger brothers, when I was old enough to actually remember this, we used to live on a dirt road, and she was advised, as the pregnancy advised, if you want to kind of help jostle things loose, drive over all the washboarding on the road to kind of jostle things. So I can see, certain workouts if you know your body, if you're not going to be stupid about it, go for it.
Okay, so that Yair Rodriguez versus Zabit is happening at UFC 228, which is when is that one?
Is that the Los Angeles card?
Oh, okay, here's a good fight.
No.
This just got made yesterday. Jimmy Rivera versus John Dodson.
I'm down.
That's a great fight.
Oh, they also announced last night for their Los Angeles event, 227, I think, the co-main event is going to be the rematch between Demetrius Johnson and Henry Cejudo.
Okay.
Oh, that's right. They did announce that rematch, so
they'll
good.
be the co-main to Dillashaw Garbrandt too.
Yeah.
Okay, yeah, I'm in for that card.
Yep.
It's a pretty good card.
Hopefully, I can go to this card.
Ooh.
I want to go to this card, so hopefully,
actually, I take that back.
Pans out.
That's not a very good card. There's a few good fights. Cub Swanson and Hanato Moicano is on that.
That's a great fight.
Again, DJ and Cejudo, Dillashaw and Garbrandt. It gets pretty slim after that.
So there are three good
slim.
fights. If they hold, there are three good fights on there, really.
Danielle Taylor's fighting, which is not necessarily a good thing, but I have this weird appreciation for her. Oh God, don't hit me, bam, right hand.
So those are the so I think those are the main news items from the last week.
Alrighty. On that note, let's go ahead and jump into plugs here. Jeff, I know you've had some E3 coverage recently, so what do you want to plug?
Yeah, I'm doing I'm doing a couple E3 news items right now. That'll be in games soon. A couple previews that I can't talk about yet because I'm under embargo and I signed NDAs earlier. But if you've watched the Xbox briefing, you'll know some of what I'll be talking about in the next couple days. Movie reviews I have coming up in the next 2 weeks. I have The Incredibles 2, which I saw yesterday. I can't talk about it yet, though. Jurassic World, which I can talk about. Jurassic World Fallen Kingdom. I'll be reviewing that. There's a Marvel Netflix show I can't talk about, but if you know what's coming, you have a good idea.
Let's go, Luke Cage.
I didn't say
Jeff
that. Pat did.
Jeff can neither confirm nor deny.
Right, correct. So be on the lookout. There's lots of cool stuff coming. I talked to the cast and crew of Marvel's Cloak and Dagger, which is
sorry.
They're nice people. They're nice people, Pat. Even if you don't like the
They are
material.
nice people.
Yeah,
they are nice people. Even though Robert would find it probably the biggest social justice warrior show in the history of
Haven't watched
in the history of
it.
I won't judge them by playing characters that I've hated since I was like 3.
So I did talk to them, and that coverage is all done. It's in, and that'll be in Movies and TV at the end of the month because we had some spoilery discussions about later episodes, so I kind of wanted to wait to put it up until after those episodes air. So be on the lookout for lots of good stuff. If you like comic books, superheroes, gaming, all of it'll be in.
How much? Jeff, I know you've been at E3. How much Kingdom Hearts press was there out there?
Well, E3 today was just briefing stuff. E3 hasn't full on started yet.
Okay.
So I haven't been over to Square Enix yet to actually see, but it looks like Kingdom Hearts will have a presence on the show floor.
Yeah.
The show floor officially.
I was watching the Twitch stream when they announced it.
They
were going through their basic announcement, and Kingdom Hearts
so they
is
announced
there.
the release date.
We have the Frozen World coming to the. We have both the Frozen World and Wreck-It Ralph World that they kind of teased.
Don't forget Toy Story. They had already announced Toy Story and Monsters Inc. worlds previously, so now we know it's coming out January 29th of next year. If it even keeps that release date. So fingers crossed. So we have a release date for 2019 now. A game that's I want to say 14 years in the making since Kingdom Hearts 2, or it's been quite a while since Kingdom Hearts 2. So
quite a while. 2 remakes of Kingdom Hearts 2, just because people love it so much.
we have cover. I didn't do that story, but we have Kingdom Hearts 3 coverage in there. So thank you guys, and have a good week.
Thanks, Jeff. We'll see you next week. All right, Pat, is there anything you'd like to plug?
Yes, there is actually. This coming week, I will be recording an episode of Source Material along with Jesse Starcher, Mark Radulich, and Ronnie Adams. We will be reviewing the classic Fantastic Four story, The Trial of Galactus. For those who don't know it, basically a brief synopsis is, since Reed Richards saved the life of Galactus but made him promise to spare the Earth, Galactus made his way around the universe devouring other worlds. And those worlds, finding out about the bargain that Reed Richards made with him, in addition to saving his life, well, they feel he's guilty of the destruction of these worlds. And as a result, they're going to put him on trial for it, and it's up to Reed and his family/team to try to prove his innocence before he's put to death by the likes of the Skrull Empire and the Shi'ar. So it's going to be a great show. For those who know me, you know my love of the Fantastic Four is very, very deep. This is one of the best Fantastic Four stories, and really one of the best stories about Reed, who in many ways is one of the great characters that never gets the credit he deserves for being such.
Come on. You're telling me someone played by Miles Teller wasn't done justice?
Shocking, I know, between Reed Richards and
Yeah,
Vinny Pazienza, and yeah, Miles Teller sucks.
I would almost blame J.K. Simmons for the rise of Miles Teller because of Whiplash, and J.K. Simmons is just so great in that movie. But I can't blame J.K. Simmons for anything negative because he's awesome.
Yeah, he's too good to put all the responsibility on for that. But yeah, so be on the lookout for that episode. And if you've been paying attention on social media, the Casual Heroes are returning, and we have announced one show that we're going to be adding to the repertoire. It's going to be Old Games, Old Guys, starring Gavin Napier. I will, of course, be a guest on that show, but it's going to be a retro gaming show where we talk about classic video games from the past. And just to be nice to you guys, because I love you, I will give you the first games that we have announced as part of the relaunch. So, if you are ready and your joysticks are fired up, be on the lookout for, to the surprise of none, WWF WrestleMania for the NES, Tecmo World Wrestling, Tecmo Bowl, WWF Steel Cage Challenge, the original football franchise, John Elway Football, and several other games that we'll go through as time goes on. But that's a new show, Old Games, Old Guys, retro gaming for you. Multiple games that we're going to be reviewing through it. My favorite part, I will likely be on the WWF WrestleMania edition. My favorite part of which is that the $1 Million Man, Ted DiBiase, has girls in cars for his entrance theme. Seriously, look it up on YouTube.
Oh. I'd ask a follow-up, but you'd probably start singing the song, and then...
I will hum the MIDI version if you prefer.
I'd rather you didn't, all things considered. All right. As for myself, this Tuesday, I believe, Mark Radulich and I will be reviewing The Incredibles 2. Long time in the making, and the sequel to, since we kind of brought up the trial of Reed Richards, the actual best Fantastic Four movie is The Incredibles.
True.
Which is both sad and awesome. It's also the best... I'm going to piss people off. It's the best superhero movie featuring Samuel L. Jackson.
Wow. Okay.
No, not serious about that, guys. Come on. I know he's Nick Fury. Please don't throw things at me. I was gonna. What I meant is it's some of his best voice work, because he's done a few voiceover things, and him as Frozone is great.
Him as Frozone is better than him as Nick Fury. Sorry.
That's fair. Probably accurate. So anyway, you can listen to Mark and I discuss that. The show will be posted this Tuesday. It's called Damn You Hollywood. So Mark and I will go over the movie, we'll go over the money, and we'll explain why critics suck. Seriously, Ben Shapiro stole my bit. I'm so annoyed.
I would be annoyed, but I love Ben, so I can't.
I love Ben too, but for those of you who don't...
Sorry, not sorry.
I don't want to get political, so I'm not going to, but if you are familiar with Ben Shapiro, you know about his daily podcast. For the record, he's a conservative political thinker, blogger, again, podcaster. I don't agree with him on everything, but I like listening to him, because even if I don't agree, he makes me evaluate my position. and see if I can actually defend it. When talking about review, when he did just a brief thing about how much the critics suck when talking about Ocean's 8, which came out last week. And he does, by himself, what Mark and I do at the close of every Damn You Hollywood, and he arrived at the same conclusion that I did. I mean, if you listen to I think it was his Friday show, if you want to listen to it, get to the point where he talks about the critics, he just reads some of their reviews, then explains why they're bad. It's very similar to what I said when reviewing, I think it was A Wrinkle in Time. It's like, they couldn't bring themselves to say this movie isn't good, even though it sucked. So, oddly, Ben Shapiro stole my gimmick. And I don't know how to feel about it, but... So we'll be doing that again this Tuesday, is when the show is posted late Tuesday evening, so you can listen to that. We'll be back here next week. There's not an MMA event to preview or for me to cover this week, so yay, Saturday off. Next Saturday, at some ungodly hour in the morning.
I think it's 8 a.m. Eastern.
Probably. This would be the 23rd. There will be UFC Fight Night 132, which is the UFC returning to Singapore, and it's headlined by Donald Cerrone. Because Donald is great that way. Like, oh, this crappy card. Here, let me put on a fight that at least is going to be worth watching. I don't know whether I should hate you, whether I should thank you for that, Donald, or curse you, because if you weren't on it, I wouldn't have to watch it. But next week we will be previewing that card, so come back for that. It's one of those overseas cards, guys. I don't know what else you want me to say. But again, that early next set, so 2 Saturdays, again the 23rd, I'll have coverage of that. But until then, thank you all very much for being here, for listening, for pointing us at your friends, or your friends at us, whichever works for you. If you have friends that are interested in MMA, point them in the direction of the show, see if they like it. Happy to keep growing this thing, and I can't grow it without you. I cannot strap people down and make them listen to this. I tried, it was a thing. Local ordinances. Can't do it. But if you could point them in our direction, I'd deeply appreciate it. So, thank you. Until next time, for Jeff and Pat, I'm Robert. Please continue to be well, be safe, and behave.